Tonight is, oh, turn off my sound.
Great, we can hear you now.
All right, we'll try this again. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Lunenburg Finance Committee meeting. Tonight is Thursday, March 31st. It is 7:03 p.m. We are in the Bellata meeting room at Lunenburg Town Hall, and I am hereby calling the meeting to order. Members present are myself, Peter Beardmore, Chris Menard, Dave Passios, and Jay Simeone just arrived. And we have participating remotely Tom Baelish. I do expect Evan Waters to join in remotely shortly. And I have not heard from Tom Gray, so hopefully he'll be here shortly. In accordance with the requirements of the open meeting law, please be advised that this meeting is being recorded and broadcast,
Recording in progress.
and broadcast over the Lunenburg Public Access channel and on Facebook Live on the Public Access Facebook page. We are on Zoom. If you'd like to participate on Zoom, on the Zoom app, enter webinar ID 79273-70353 or dial toll-free 888-475-4499. And again, enter webinar ID 792-737-0353. Please note the available Zoom option, broadcast, and recordings are for the convenience of the public. If any technical difficulties were to occur, the meeting will continue. If you wish to continue to participate, you must report to this location, Lunenburg Town Hall. This agenda lists all the topics which may be discussed at the meeting and are those reasonably anticipated by the chair. Votes may be taken as a result of these discussions. Not all items listed may in fact be discussed, and other items not listed may also be brought up for discussion to the extent permitted by the open meeting law. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Are there any announcements? For the record, Evan Waters has joined the meeting, so we have more than a quorum now. Public comment. Is there any public comment from the board? I have a comment. A few weeks ago, in discussion about the capital plan, Mr. Passios and I got into a brief exchange about the roles of the Capital Planning Committee and the role of the Finance Committee. And not long after that, it may have been that meeting, it may have been a subsequent meeting, I had stated that my intention with respect to the capital plan was to vote with the majority of the board. I've had a few conversations about that since that night. I've actually gone back and reread the charter and given it some serious consideration. And my position on that has changed a little bit. As I read the charter, my view is that while the duties of the Capital Planning Committee and the Finance Committee are pretty clear, they're also not very specific in terms of delineation of responsibilities when it comes to oversight and the judgment as to what constitutes a decision that is in the best financial interest of the town. And it is my view that as Finance Committee members, as our role, first of all, our appointing committee, which includes school committee, select board, and the town moderator, the fact that we're not elected, that we have very little direct authority, but we are the only committee whose responsibility is purely to advise town meeting. And because of that, I think that we have a responsibility as individual members really to vote our conscience on every article. And you know, at this point, I still have serious reservations with a couple of items on the capital plan. I actually have not made up my mind, but my mind is that I am going to vote my conscience on this and not necessarily vote with the majority. So I wanted everybody to be aware of that as we go into the discussions this evening, just kind of putting cards on the table. I'm not going to discuss the specifics of the articles right now because we have plenty of time to do that this evening, but I just wanted to make everybody aware of that. Any additional public comment? Hearing none. Chair's report. So just administratively, we have gone ahead and advertised for a second public hearing on the night of March 14th. Let me double check that. Make sure that's a Thursday. Yes, it is in fact a Thursday. April 14th. It is not in fact correct. April 14th. And I suspect after having a couple of conversations today that there may in fact be a need to have that hearing and to reopen at least a couple of articles for our recommendations. So as you may be aware, having read your email, that I added an agenda item tonight specifically to talk about the wage schedule and the proposed salary administration bylaw change. There's quite a bit of additional information that we have not heard relative to those two articles that I think we may want to listen to tonight and stew on for a couple of weeks, and we may not want to vote recommendations on those articles this evening. There's also a potential question that the town manager brought to my attention earlier today about the proposed change to the sewer bylaw and whether or not that may have a financial impact or not. And she wants to go to town council to kind of hash that out a little bit. So there may be a very good reason to have that, you know, reopen that public hearing just to make sure that we're completely above the level, in compliance, so to speak, and then reconsider those articles on the 14th. Other than that, I have nothing else specific under the chair's report. Town manager and finance director report. No report? Okay. We did get an email from the finance director on updated expenditures. I'm sorry. So while we're on that agenda item, does anybody have any questions for the finance director or town manager specific to the updated expenditures email? Nope. Okay. This is going to be, knock on wood, we're moving right along here. Okay, item 7, proposed fiscal 2023 wage schedule and proposed salary administration bylaw change. Good evening. Please, if you could introduce yourself and let's get into it.
Sure. My name is Eric Arnold. I'm the chair of the Personnel Committee. And I guess I can give you a brief summary. Basically, we've been meeting a lot more than we normally do the past, 2 to 3 months.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah, it's been a busy time, but
Time of year.
so one of the things we've been doing, the town hired an attorney to kind of review the salary administration plan, and which was probably long overdue, and made some recommendation for changes. Some of it was just updating language, maybe not of huge consequence, and some of it was more substantial. Some of it was to get it more in line with the charter. or just remove outdated stuff. So that was a lot of our work was around that, and so we have voted for changes to various changes to the SAP, which I believe you have a kind of a track change version of that.
Could you just kind of give us the summary in terms of the
Well,
effects of those changes, I guess, is probably the best way to ask the question.
yeah, so it might be,
In fact, we don't have the I think we got an email to this effect, but we don't have the handout.
I can give you, let's see, a few examples here. Like one recommendation was to remove our layoff procedure. There's a specific layoff procedure in the SAP, and one of the recommendations was to remove that because the attorney believed it was covered elsewhere in the town charter. And so we considered that after looking at what was in the town charter. Just as an example, in this case, we felt it didn't address everything that the SAP plan did, so we actually kept that in. And we had SAP employees come to our meetings, along with our town manager and assistant town manager, and so we were getting a lot of different thoughts on some of these proposed changes. The attorney joined us for, I think, one meeting, and then kind of give us some follow-up advice over some questions we had. Another area of change, some minor change was around the grievance procedure. Should we make some changes to that, or even just remove it? We kept it. We modified that a little bit by adding another layer of kind of recourse that an employee could go to by adding, since we now have like an assistant town manager, which we didn't years ago when this was last modified. So now that is the assistant town manager or human resources person. That would be a person that a SAP employee could go to if they did have a grievance. What else? Some of the language around what is a full-time employee? It used to say 40 hours. Some of those definitions have been updated to make them accurate, which is 36 hours is considered full-time. The adding of the Juneteenth holiday, some changes of, it used to say like personal time was calculated in hours, and the reality is days makes a lot more sense for whether you're part-time or full-time. So just changing from, let's say, 8 hours to 1 day, or 24 hours to 3 days. And the Family and Medical Leave Act, that was basically, we had some language in the SAP, and the reality is we just have to follow what the town regulations around that are. So we removed it from the SAP. Like I said, some of the definitions were updated. And then the other major piece is the salary grid. And the salary grid, normally, I've been on the personnel committee for a few years now. I don't remember how long actually, but we usually do 3 years out for when it's time for to update the salary grid. This year we decided to only do 1 year, and the reason, one of our main goals was to have at least we have, right now we have 20 grades, 8 steps. So every position that's on the SAP is assigned a grade based on the kind of responsibilities or education that might be required for that. And then you have 8 steps basically each year. 1 step is a year, and that can, your pay will go up with each year that you're here. So 20 grades, 8 steps. We did consider, many towns have, let's say, 10 grades instead of 20, or maybe 15, or maybe 8. Some have 10 steps where we have 8 steps. So we did kind of consider looking at really changing it, but realized, we needed to think about it a lot more. We needed more time to make sure that every position would have an appropriate grade in any changes that we made. So essentially what we did was we kept the same 20 grades, 8 steps, but we made sure that grade 1, step 1 is minimum wage, which it hasn't been. We have not had a starting wage that was actually meeting minimum wage in the state of Massachusetts for years. Just as an example, if you look at for FY22, grade 1, step 1 is $11.10 an hour. So really, like the first 3 grades, other than the last couple steps in grade 3, were below. Every one of those was below minimum wage. So we thought it was well overdue that we at least meet minimum wage. And the reality is, we're not going to be able to hire someone at $11 an hour when they can get $15.50 at the convenience store down the street. So that was it's tough to make that adjustment when you have 20 grades without blowing up the budget or the impact it might have on the budget. If you kept everything the same, if you kept the kind of increase between the grades the same as it has been for years, to go from an $11 an hour hourly rate to $14.25, that is it's a significant percentage increase. It may not, a few dollars may not seem like that for someone that's just looking at that hourly rate, but percentage-wise, that's it's a 28% increase in 1 year. And obviously, normally people don't get a 28% increase in 1 year, but that's what we had to do in those early grades to get up to pace. And honestly, we should have done this years ago, and then it wouldn't have been such a big jump this year. So this, in order to kind of reduce the impact on the budget, essentially what you would see in the new salary grid for FY23, or the one that we've passed and are proposing to the town, is where that grade 1 sees a 28% increase, grade 2 goes down to 23, then down to 18 and 11, then 5, and then everything else goes to 2, which is kind of what we've done in recent years, is basically a 2% increase from 1 year to the next. But if you didn't, you had to kind of step that down to a few grades, or else you would end up with potentially a grade 2 person making more than a grade 4 person. So there needed to be some adjustment. We tried to do it in a way that was obviously made sense for the employees, but also made sense for the town. I think that's probably the summary I can give you. And our hope is that if this passes, we have a year to figure out if there is a better way of doing our kind of grade and step that makes sense for everyone.
Do we know what the annual cost associated with those updates is?
Yeah, it's Heather was able to calculate that, incorporating a number of factors, and it's so the total general operating budget, the impact to it would be $44,250.77.
And how many employees are salary administration?
Well, so there's, I'd say ballpark, it's around 20 to 25, but then you have another 10 to 15 that are on call, right? So there's on-call EMTs, on-call firemen, and so that can be any number of people. It varies year to year, but she was able to estimate what that impact might be based on previous years.
And that covers seasonal employees?
Yeah.
Mr. Waters has a question.
Just that $44,000 increase, is that all for filled positions, or is that across everything that is available to be filled?
Those are the filled positions.
do you have an idea of how many unfilled positions remain?
Well, I think it's, the unfilled is essentially zero. Because even if correct me if I'm wrong, Heather, but like, for example, the director of DPW, I think, is currently unfilled, but Heather calculated based on what the previous.
Budgeted.
Yeah.
Right.
What the previous wage was, and to estimate that. So even though it's unfilled, it's at this time, it's still included in this calculation.
Okay, so if this was all to be approved, and then, so it's not like we're going to have this large number of open positions that all of a sudden get filled, and that $44,000 jumps up to $144,000 worth of wages. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Correct.
Any other questions?
No, I'm in favor. Every budget I ask if we're paying minimum wage, and I know we don't have to, but I think we should.
So,
I think, just to follow up on that, I think in a normal, if we didn't do anything other than increase it 2%, I think the impact on the budget would be in the low 20s. I don't know if it's 20 or 25,000, 22,000, something like that. So it's obviously more than that, but it's not, it's never zero, right? There's always an impact.
Yeah, actually, that was the question I was going to ask is, what are the assumptions in the current budget today that we're looking at tonight? And is this, how often does this process happen?
So approving a new salary grid is typically every 3 years.
Okay. And there are no interim adjustments? They're just the step adjustments, I guess, as each person gets another year deeper into their tenure?
Yes, unless the town approves a new position on the SAP, if they,
well, we've approved COLA increases in the past where we're not messing with the schedule, but we're just saying, 2% or a 3% COLA.
Right.
So, which is effectively what you've done to the higher steps on this plan.
Yes.
This is going to sound, and this may not be relevant, but I'll ask the question anyway. I have a way of doing that, I guess. What you've just described to me, in other words, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because you've moved substantially on the lower steps and less on the higher steps, is that the grid has been compressed monetarily. And I'm wondering if that could potentially be, it could potentially hurt us from a retention standpoint. And I know that that's counterintuitive because now we're paying people more competitively at the lower stages, but there's less of a percentage increase to make if you're sticking around for 4 to 5 years or however long that is. And I'm curious if that was discussed or if that's a concern.
Yeah, well, I guess the issue of retention was brought up, I would say briefly. We did have another kind of model of a salary grid that kind of kept things, I would say, expanded the salaries, the hourly wages for the different grades, and we estimated that budget impact was probably more around the $70,000 to $80,000 range, which we probably felt might be not something the town was prepared to accept. So I think that's trying to, you are correct. There's not an easy way of doing it. If you tried to keep the same increase for everyone, then it becomes kind of unworkable budget-wise. But so it has benefited more the lower grades. They're seeing a better increase than anyone else. But there still is a difference between the grades. It's just that the lower grades are actually closer to the higher grades now than they were before. But that's one reason. It's just not a simple thing to, if we did switch to, let's say, 10 grades instead of 20, it's just going to take some time to figure out where each position should be on that. And we didn't have the time, and we didn't want to rush it and come up with something that wasn't what it should be. So we figure if we, get approval for this 1 year, at least we're taking care of the minimum wage problem, and hopefully come back with something a little more in depth for at least potentially 2 or 3 years down the road that will carry us into the future.
Ms. Bellata, who is, I believe, on your committee, has her hand raised, so I would invite her to unmute herself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for recognizing me. Yes, to go with the retention, that was a lot of what was brought up within the meeting were people that were senior, and once they hit that top step, all they will continue to get is their COLA. So we are trying to balance that with the 23, 24 to try to care for both ends, as you suggested.
Okay.
They were very vocal in the SAP employees in that dialogue.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Isn't there a longevity number also associated with those steps? So, I think that helps you on the higher end. I've always felt that the lower end brings in new talent if you get those numbers, up away from the bottom of the barrel.
Any other questions or comments?
Is there any plans to do a, townwide study, wage study from a consulting company, more professional?
So my kind of limited knowledge of that is if we were to hire a consultant that's potentially tens of thousands of dollars, and to my knowledge, we haven't, to my knowledge, it's not in the budget to do that. There are, less professional ways of kind of gathering that information, and our assistant town manager, Julie, has done some of that in the past, and I think it's something that might be what we have to do going forward is doing just some more research on our own if the town does not, do this kind of more professional study.
So we can anticipate this again next year then, right? Because that's the final minimum wage increase.
So, next year, we're definitely going to have to come back to you next year to get something approved. And yeah, if at a minimum, it would be, we know it's going to $15 an hour on January 1st. So we do have language that essentially is, even after January 1st, if there was someone to be hired at a grade 1, step 1, which if this passes would be $14.25, that we have language that would say they would be hired at minimum wage, which would be the 15. So, and everyone that's currently on the SAP, nobody would be below minimum wage. So it's really right now we're in good shape, and if someone new is hired, it's up to us to make sure that we hire them at the right grade. So there shouldn't be any problems that we can't fix. But yeah, next year we'd have to come back with either the same 20 grades and just starting it differently at 15, or with a new model that also addresses the minimum wage issue.
I would recommend you look at separating your managerially salary employees from your hourly employees, separate wage schedules, and also possibly separate wage schedules for seasonal employees. And I'd also like to know from the town manager, do you have any plans to put money in the budget to do a outsourced wage compensation study? Do you have any plans for the future to do that? Because this problem isn't going away.
I've heard of it today, so
something for our list of things to talk about in FY '23, it sounds
This
like.
isn't going away. It's gonna need to be
What's
looked
that?
at.
In June, right.
It's always good to do a view of what your competitors are doing and all that, because you don't want to have a bunch of people leave and you go, oh,
Yeah, no,
we
I-
lost a lot of good people, so you want to be ahead of that.
I-
So
I think Jay's
I'm not sure
suggestions
what
are
the right
good,
thing
yeah.
to do is, whether you have the,
Needs to be outsourced.
somebody internally keep track. I'm sure a lot of these salaries are all public, so it's probably easier to get that data. You might not need to hire a consultant, but it's definitely a good thing to do and have as a regular a standard of procedure to make sure you're paying what you should be paying and not having people steal your people.
One of the tougher things to do is to determine job responsibilities. Right? You could have
Job
a
descriptions.
similar sounding title, and the wages could be very different, but we don't necessarily know, do they have different responsibilities? Are they working more hours? Is it, so that's kind of the trick. There's not always a comparable title to what we're used to.
Ms. Bellata?
My question was, would it be a capital expense for if you did an outside salary comparison? Would that classify as in capital expense because it's a one-time and it might possibly would be over 10,000?
The current limit is 20,000, but it would, it's something we would have to obviously entertain next year and figure out where it belongs. I think there's a number of ways to skin that cat potentially, so.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate you taking the time to come talk with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Peter, could I make a quick comment?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank the committee and the previous members over the past almost decade that have brought the salary administration up to the par that it is today. There were numerous issues working through the last decade, and as was stated this evening, this is another major step in the right direction. There's still more to be done, but there's been a lot done over the last 10 years, and it's been numerous people that have been on those committees, and I thank them.
Agree. All right, thank you very much. Next up, public hearing for the FY23 budget, capital plan, and all financially relevant annual town meeting warrant articles. So before we begin, I just want to talk about how we will do both this agenda item and the next one. So the town manager has a presentation prepared that will walk us through the budget, the capital plan, and other financially relevant items that she wants to bring to our attention. Following that presentation, I will open it up to the committee for questions and comments. I will then open it to the public for questions and comments, because this is a public hearing. And then the committee will once again have the last word before I close the public hearing and we move on to voting and discussing on the warrant articles. And somebody needs to remind me to close the public hearing at the end of this agenda item. Madam Town Manager.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
All right, so let's get right to it.
Let me find the appropriate tab on my screen here. Oh, so and I apologize for going back an agenda item, but I did put it in the chat on the Zoom, and it is in the email from the town manager relative to the changes in the salary administration. I guess it's a bylaw. Mm-hmm. It's a very long document that has a lot of changes in it. So read through it, please, if you haven't already. And I think it'll be potentially good fodder for conversation in a couple of weeks. Madam Town Manager, let me find your presentation. There we go. And if somebody who's on the Zoom could just keep an eye on the participants tab, because when I share my screen, I lose visibility of that. And we will need to go and admit people when the time comes.
Are you talking either Tom or I? Because we won't be able to see that. It's going to have to be on PAC's side, right?
Say again?
It's going to have to be on PAC's side for that, right?
No, you can see it in Zoom if you just drop out of full screen and click on the participants tab. You should be able to see it. Oh, you know what? You won't be able to see people in the waiting room.
Right. You have to make us either a partial host or
Thank you for reminding me of that. So you know what I'm going to do is, Evan,
offer it to Tom.
Evan, I'm going to make you co-host. Congratulations.
Field promotion.
You have hereby been field promoted to co-host.
Last of the party, you get promoted.
So now you should be able to see it if somebody comes in the waiting room, Evan.
Okay.
All right,
All right.
Madam Town Manager.
Great. So a lot of this is going to sound familiar from previous meetings, because a lot of it's, some things have remained the same, and the things that have changed, we've talked about at previous meetings. So the FY23 recommendation reflects maintaining current service levels with some exceptions. It's a balanced budget based on use of recurring revenues for operating costs, and there's no request for a draw on free cash or stabilization towards the operating budget. It reflects conservative revenue projections. It meets or exceeds the town's financial policies, including recommending a transfer of $100,000 free cash into the regular stabilization account. As discussed last week, we're going to alter the recommendation for the special purpose stabilization and increase that to $450,000 into the special purpose stabilization account. And this will help pay for future large capital purchases that are one-time expenses, and will prohibit us from the need to borrow for those. And it recommends a transfer of $266,696 from free cash into the OPEB, other post-employment benefits account, which is 10% of the previous year's certified free cash.
That's policy driven, right, Heather?
Yes. So when we look at revenues, our property tax revenues reflect adding 2.5% to the previous year's levy per Proposition 2.5, which is and includes an estimate of $213,523 for new growth, and the debt exclusion amount of $2,831,932 for a total of $30,854,794. State aid reflects the Governor's House 1 state aid figure, which was a 10% increase for a total of $10,390,105. Local receipts reflect a 1.6% increase, or $50,000 over the previous fiscal year for motor vehicle excise taxes, but level funds all other receipt categories for a total of $3,110,153. And in other available funds, it reflects $2,350,230.39 from free cash to offset the capital plan, OPEB, regular stabilization account, the special purpose stabilization account, prior year bill, the 30 School Street article that we'll talk about in a few slides, the Woodruff property cleanup article, which we will also talk about in a few slides. It also includes unexpended capital funding, the MSBA reimbursement, artificial turf field revolving funds, water, sewer, solid waste, and the PAC or PEG enterprise funds and other available funds, for a total of $5,789,417. When we look at available funds, we're using $2,350,230.39 from free cash. $983,034.39 is going towards the fiscal 23 capital plan. $266,696 into the OPEB trust fund. $100,000 into the regular stabilization. $500 for a previous fiscal year invoice. $450,000 into the special purpose stabilization account, $100,000 for the Woodruff property cleanup article, and $450,000 for the 30 School Street demolition of that building and engineering for that site. The unexpended capital from previous fiscal years towards the fiscal '23 capital plan includes $212,089.61. Other available funds is the MSBA reimbursement for $534,501. The water betterments, which fund the associated water debt service, is $58,837.50. The sewer enterprise fund and sewer retained earnings total $2,006,904. That includes indirect costs and sewer debt service. The public access enterprise fund is $211,515, which also includes indirect costs. The water enterprise is level funded from last year at $25,000. The solid waste enterprise is level funded at $302,000. And it transfers $42,134 from the artificial turf revolving fund to pay for that artificial turf field debt for fiscal '23. And another available fund is transferring $10,000 from cemetery sale of lots for care improvement embellishment of cemeteries. That's outside of the operating budget. So the committee had asked for kind of where we stood with different COVID revenues. So the finance director provided the following 3 slides on what was expended from CARES funding, and that was an allotment we would submit for a essentially reimbursement type. That's unlike ARPA, we got the full allotment of money up front. CARES was more reimbursement model. So as CARES went along, we did have $1,027,771 allotted for town expenses, but there were very strict guidelines on eligible expenses. So there were times when we requested, and they were very good about, they had a point of contact where we could request whether it was an eligible expense, and he would respond that day or the next day, whether it was or not. So there were limited opportunities there. And the FEMA funding, that is ongoing. So far to date, $102,945.82 is FEMA related that we will, I don't know at what point we'll see that reimbursement. Sometimes FEMA takes many, many years to get that reimbursement, but that is eligible for FEMA reimbursement.
Is there a cap or a timeline on the COVID-19 FEMA program?
I am unaware of one. I think probably when the federal government.
Right now, it's just listed as ongoing, but I mean, eventually they'll close that date, but.
We just don't know. Okay.
And for ARPA funding, so far $7,171 has been expended. And at some point, I'd like to incorporate school funding articles as well for COVID related, because they have separate funding, the ESSER 1, 2, and 3 funds, as well as other grants. When you look at the recommended budget, it reflects requests to increase the staffing levels for certain town departments, including 1 additional police officer for half a year in the budget, includes 1 additional career firefighter, creates a new full-time facilities director position, creates a part-time clerical support position for the police department, as well as the conservation division. It restructures the Council on Aging meal site program by adding 1 part-time position. It creates a part-time technical support position for IT, creates 2 part-time library positions to open on Fridays, and adds 4 hours for the assistant tax collector, and addresses wages for various staff that were less than state minimum wage.
I had a question that actually came to me this week from somebody pertaining to new positions. And it had to do with basically additional carrying costs associated with these positions. So for example, 2 positions in the library, that's, desk space for those 2 positions, a computer, that sort of thing. first question is, are all those carrying costs budgeted for? And second question is are there downstream additional costs waiting for us, like we don't have an office for this person or anything along those lines that might come around to bite us in the next year?
I'm unaware of any unanticipated costs that aren't budgeted for.
Okay.
The FY23 budget recommendation for, on the school side, includes the priority needs identified in the superintendent's 3.11% budget. For Monty Tech, it includes a 17% increase for the assessment based on the minimum required. Other budgetary highlights for non-discretionary funding include our retirement assessment. It reflects a 10% increase over the previous fiscal year for Worcester Regional Retirement. For health insurance, it reflects a 5.56 rate increase for active employees and 5% rate increase for retirees. The solid waste recycling program, it reflects an 11% decrease based on the this fiscal year's expenses. Debt service reflects a 3% decrease. Cherry sheet offset charges reflects a 2.5% decrease based on the governor's state budget proposal. Tax title includes a 16% increase, and allowance for abatements reflects a 2.5% decrease. When we
Tax title is an expense in this case?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because we have to pay a tax title attorney to move properties through the foreclosure process. And there's other associated fees. For other money articles, there's an article to fund the first year of the collective bargaining agreement for the clerical union for fiscal 22. That funding source is to transfer from the FY22 salary reserve account, the amount of $15,303. And that will come after the budget adjustment article when funding of money's transferred into that account, but with our existing appropriation. We discussed that.
Can you say that again slowly?
So we have our FY22 budget adjustment article where we'll cover snow and ice,
Yep.
but we'll also transfer money into available funds within the FY22 budget into the salary reserve. We'll cover that 15.
Cover what is effectively a retroactive salary increase.
Yes.
Got it.
Heather, didn't we have a number already plugged into that account for this contract?
No.
Okay. I thought we did because that was in negotiations last year also. Okay. If you say no, that's fine.
There's approximately 6,000, I think, available in that account. Article for the consultant fees and expenses to remove and dispose of solid waste materials and restore the area at 104 Fairview, which is the Woodruff property. That funding source is to transfer from free cash, $100,000. The demolition design services for 30 School Street, the old primary school, the funding source is free cash of $450,000. There's an article for the creation of the 300th anniversary committee to cover initial, and the article is not only to create it, but to appropriate money to cover the initial expenses for that committee. And that is to be determined, so the select board will discuss that on Tuesday. And there's an article to fund the fiscal 23 salary administration plan wage increases that the personnel committee chairman just spoke to. And that would come out of the fiscal 23 salary reserve account. That estimate is $44,250 for the general fund, and there's approximately $5,845 from other sources that would be enterprise related. So that, if there's any enterprise employees that are also under the salary administration plan, it would be covered by the enterprise.
Why would we be funding the reserve account only to transfer it out? You know,
Because we would need to know if it passed first. So we're gonna fund it at the level that's in the recommended budget. And the next article, later on,
Right.
will be to transfer those funds out of it, that
So
account.
we're gonna pass a budget that includes this $44,250 in the salary reserve account. And then we're gonna vote on an article which transfers money out of that account that we just passed.
Right.
Okay.
What if it doesn't pass?
I'm
the
confused
money's-
also,
yeah.
because I always thought that the salary reserve account was already funded for any anticipated increases from contractual agreements that were in process, so on and so forth. Apparently, we're not in that position this time.
No, that line is an appropriation that different negotiation, once the collective bargaining agreements are reached, the funds come out of that account.
Right, but we're putting funds in to cover,
No, we're level funding that account from last year. It's that account has maintained the same level. And this article will withdraw down on that account.
Okay.
okay.
And what is the amount in the line item?
Total between the retirement,
Salary reserve account line item.
yes, but it's consolidated between two. It's 94,000.
Okay. And do we have any collective bargaining agreements coming due next year that we expect to draw on that account?
Yes, so I anticipate that we may need to appropriate money at the special town meeting into that account, but at this point, the police negotiations are going through the Department of Labor Relations right now, regarding, on nothing to do with the town, regarding switching union representation. So I don't know how long that process will be, if it will be, by annual town meeting next year.
Is that the major collective bargaining agreement for next year?
And the second year impact for the clerical would come out of that account as well.
Okay. So this is probably an underfunded account. Okay.
It was dependent on decisions made by a personnel committee or outside my purview.
Yeah, no, I understand. It just strikes me as weird that we're funding a salary reserve account knowing that we're gonna drain it of a certain amount of money in the next article. I just, in the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't matter because it's moving you're moving your money from your right pocket to your left. It's not that big a deal. It just,
Well, you might not pass
you
it.
might not move it. Right. Right. Okay.
Why couldn't that come from free cash?
Because we don't fund operating budget expenses out of free cash.
It's considered operating.
Seems like a conservative way to do it, though.
Yeah. Yeah. And we will have unappropriated money that we could potentially move at special town meeting.
Yes, we will, as we'll get to later. There is surplus.
Okay.
Peter, one question.
Yep.
Heather, if this salary administration plan were not coming up, would we still be transferring this money?
No, that line item for the salary reserve would be available for transfer at some point during the fiscal year through a town meeting vote. So if there were another, say, collective bargaining agreement that came up in the fall that were to be voted on, it would be transferred out of that account as well.
So am I understanding that we're transferring in and back out again to maintain the balance in the reserve account?
No. I think
down?
what you're confusing is fiscal 22 and fiscal 23.
Right.
So fiscal 22, we're transferring money into the salary reserve to cover the first year of the clerical bargaining, because that's fiscal 22.
It's 22, okay.
Fiscal 23, we're appropriating money like we typically do to that account. Just a future article is going to authorize those funds to be taken out in fiscal 23 for a fiscal 23 expense.
Because you couldn't build them into the 23 salary account until the agreement was
Right.
finalized.
Otherwise, we'd be rewriting the articles before
Right.
town meeting. That's the answer to the,
Yep.
that's the problem, which I understand now. It just took me a little bit of time to figure that out. Thank you.
Welcome. Does that answer everyone's questions? Did it answer, Tom? It's weird
Yes.
hearing a voice and no saying.
Yeah.
The voices from God, or in this case, Evan and Tom.
Evan? Okay. Great. All right. So the next slide is on the Woodruff property. There's some pictures to depict the condition of that site and what we're looking to fund for removal of the waste, the solid waste that's there. And a little, it's hard to see probably on the slide, but the parcel map to show the location.
So is this basically trash collection, or is there any environmental work that's going on beyond just digging crap out of the ground, or?
So the next slide
Oh, okay.
is
all right.
a long description
long description.
of the work. So it's removal of the solid waste that was disposed there as I'd say, in the words of our consultant, an unregulated dump site that was a former agricultural property. So that has been there for, he estimated between the 1950s to 1970s. So those materials were dumped on that property, and we purchased the property, the town did, in 1999. So the work will be to remove all of those materials, restore the disturbed area back to its original condition, so as not to cause any impact to that, because it's a pretty steep slope. So we don't want to impact that area and disturb that soil in that area. So the goal is to do minimal disturbance to that area, and there'll be careful removal
Yeah.
of those.
Quick question, Heather, if I may. I haven't been up there since it was an active farm, so that was a long time ago. But does this clean up, excuse me, does this clean up everything that's been left on the property, like old tractors with trees growing up through them, or is that stuff being left
No.
alone?
Yeah, that's outside of the scope of this area.
Okay.
This project, what we went through the Conservation Commission, got an order of conditions, is just this location site right here.
Okay, thank you.
There's a remarkable
'Cause-
amount of vehicles in our woods.
Oh, yeah, all over town.
Yeah. And primarily because, how the proximity to the brook
Right.
there. That's the priority.
Yep.
So the project would include disposing of all these materials as well, in accordance with state regulations, and the associated consultant fees to prepare these bid specifications, to put this out, and all those related costs. The next slide is regarding the demolition and the engineering costs related to 30 School Street, the project that the Select Board has been working on with the landscape design architect. So in the May 2021 meeting, the town funded $30,000 for landscape design services, and we went through months-long process of going through different conceptual designs and finalized a preferred design, which you see on the slide before you. And that includes additional parking, narrowing of that road, creating a pavilion area, covered pavilion area, a covered bandstand area with tiered seating that would be all natural type landscape, stone landscape, as well as walking path throughout, different seating area. So there's a lot of detail went into this conceptual plan.
Interesting how much the demolition cost has increased over the past 5 years. I'm assuming that $150,000 on the next slide, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead, is just taking the building down and removing it from the property?
The demolition? Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. That was a much smaller number 5 years ago.
That does build in a little bit of some contingency in his estimate, and that was upon recommendation from the architect. He said build in that contingency amount. So that breakdown for demolition is 150,000, engineering costs, which include the demolition plans, at 300,000.
Is there
And that will bring
anything-
us to final specifications and complete detail.
Is there any, I mean, I know we're doing an asbestos abatement for this property as well in the capital plan. I recall looking in the windows in that place maybe a couple of years ago, and there's like a furnace in that building. There's a lot of like junk in the first floor of that building. Does that just all get lobbed into the demolition and, or?
Well, we're doing a little bit hazardous abatement shortly
Yeah.
for that project. I think the boiler is one of the things that's going to get removed as part of that project. But there is a lot of records and stuff that have been there for years. I wouldn't assume that they're salvageable at this point. There's black mold and water damage and yeah.
There were a few other
Wrong way.
things that were identified in the analysis of that property other than asbestos. There wasn't a lot, but in that capital item, I think that covers all of that. There,
Yes.
It's hazardous materials, it's not
It's not
just asbestos.
Right, correct.
All right.
That is correct. Next slide is the capital plan. All the articles recommended to be funded, and there are 23 of them. I did retitle the Flat Hill Road Drainage Project to a study, as I think that's where it's going to land. And I did correspond with the engineer on that project, Brian Marchetti, and he thought the 45,000 that was in the capital article was sufficient.
So do we have any idea what we're getting on the back side of that $45,000? Like, is it a report or a recommendation or a?
Report on the source of the water issue at that.
Okay. This may still be an unsolvable problem, though, at the end of the day, right?
It may be. But I think, at least, I mean, the board hasn't discussed it yet since the site visit last week. So Tuesday, probably hear more from them on that. But I think having a final outcome that's documented is where they want to land on that.
Okay.
That sidewalk was taped, if anyone's interested in it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Sure, that's a fun watch. There was a question when we had the school department in that I believe Mr. Passio has asked about. There had been some question about electrical capacity or something on the AC system, and there was a concern if that number was the real number and it was going to cover everything that we needed to do. To make
Oh,
that
for
AC
the
go.
primary school
Yeah.
project?
Did we ever get a confirmation from anybody who's knowledgeable on that, that?
I think Mr. Passios is probably the
All right.
one to ask. I know
Get him
he
back.
was
Okay.
corresponding back and forth with the superintendent.
Okay, all right, it didn't go through you, stuff like that, okay.
The last correspondence I had, let me see. I may have to look that up
Be back in a
after
minute.
and get back to you. It landed. I think that was the recommendation by the prior facilities
Yeah.
director. And
Okay. All right, I'm reasonably confident. but I'm gonna give Mr. Passios a second here. So Dave, the question that I raised was relative to your question of the superintendent a few weeks ago on
Yes.
the AC at the primary school. Did you
Yes.
ever get any resolution on that to your satisfaction about the electrical and stuff?
The only satisfaction I've got so far for because of extenuating circumstances is that they are going to take a thorough second deep dive into making sure that the proposed project is going to achieve what they intend to achieve. It's about the best I can give you right now. They have promised to supply me with the documents I've been looking for, but there will be a delay because of circumstances out of their control right at the moment.
Okay.
There is a possibility that if they determine that the present plan does not achieve their goals, that there may have to be some discussion about going back to the higher number that was proposed 2 years ago.
And what was the delta between those numbers?
Heather, do you remember this year it's under 300,000. I know the one
232.
previously was 3 something.
Yeah. I thought the delta was around 80,000, but
Okay. But there was a comment at some point made that potentially with an upgrade as proposed by the engineers, it could be as high as $200,000 more.
Oh, good.
But it's being, they want to just make sure that they've crossed their Ts and dotted their Is on the proposed plan, and that it brings the system up to where it needs to be and not half do it.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, I'm okay with the appropriation, even if we have to wait, park the money, and, I mean, it needs to be done in my view. It's just, I would really like to know that it's going to do the job
Yeah.
when we appropriate the money,
Right.
so.
And Heather, correct me if I'm wrong, in most cases, the first move for funding, if a capital project has not been funded sufficiently to do the project, is to look within that department's budget to see if it can be fulfilled that way. That's the first look, and then other options beyond that.
yeah, our actual capital planning policy allows for movement within that capital whole
Within the
appropriation.
overall,
If
right.
there's, say, we have, an excess in one area and a deficit in another, we can fund that deficit as long as everything has been fully funded to their.
But even with a $2.2 million capital plan, we're not going to save $200,000.
I would
Most
not
likely.
expect, but
The unexpended capital that we're budgeting back into this year was
212,000,
But that was
but it was
212,000.
That
multiple,
was multiple years.
multiple years.
Yeah.
Was that multiple years? Okay.
All right.
So
That's what it is.
some
Before we jump to conclusions, for a question for the town manager, just going back to, this is Tom, going back to the old primary school. So just so I'm clear, at the end of the demolition and the engineering cost outlays, like, can you just describe, I'm just trying to understand, where will we be after all that? What will the site look like, and what are the next steps?
So the site will no longer have the building.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. There will probably be some grading that's needed to, make that more, but it does slope down because it's a walkout basement type area. The engineering funds will allow for all the engineering that's required for bid specifications, final details to go into all the final design and out and ready for bid, so that we can go to a future town meeting to request an appropriation for the construction end of the project for that conceptual plan that was shown earlier. Unless it's funded through some other mechanism, or partially funded through another mechanism.
So we'll
And
have
Go ahead.
bidding documents, and we'll be ready to go.
Yes.
Okay. And is there any rough estimate of what that next step would would cost?
The whole project, with a lot of soft costs built into that, is 4.2 million. So removing that and getting some more final cost estimates would refine that number. But that builds in all the contingencies that are needed for construction, like bonds and insurances and everything.
So my recollection on that $4.5 million was that was a sort of a fully loaded cost, albeit at a point in time, which we've all come to learn is not necessarily a cost that'll be current 2 years from now, but that would include, first of all, demolition of the building, the engineering costs, so we've got $450,000 there that we're knocking off of that effectively.
Right.
Was the asbestos abatement part of that 4.5 million?
That number was in there as well.
Okay,
Yes, so
so-
we're knocking that number off as well.
So that's another, whatever that number is.
371.
371, so we're up to, sorry, I lost my page here.
150,
So we're up to,
Roughly. 3.
over $800,000 of that 4.5 million that would be left if we were to fully develop the property. But there's also additional cost savings that we could make, such as using highway department labor, potentially using Chapter 90 type funds around School Street and the parking lot and that sort of thing. I mean, there are cost savings to be had if we didn't just contract the whole thing out
Right.
in one project.
Yep.
And-
And I
and this
think
will-
that will be the value engineering that will be done in the
Right.
next engineering phase.
Right.
The final decision, I mean, probably will be next year when we get the full plan and the money and all that. Also, we get the Marshall Park thing going on, so we will have a couple of them, and there seems like there might be some overlap, at least I think, because they're very close to each other on either side of the road, and they're for recreation. So there might, depending on what they come up with and what this is,
I think of them as very different projects, but I understand your logic. There's going to be a lot to consider on the funding for this as well as the funding for Marshall Park because, we didn't have enough money last fall when we were looking at renovation of TC Pasio's, and those problems haven't gone away. So, there's going to be a lot. And we do have ARPA money, there are some other funding sources and grants potentially for Marshall Park, but we're gonna have some difficult decisions to make. There's no doubt.
it's always too much want, not enough resource.
Exactly.
That's just part of what we do.
Just to save having to say it later, the Parks Commission has talked about, as we bring the plan forward that we're presently working on, we're asking the architects to give us phased pieces of the project.
Yep.
Oh.
Which is good.
So you can do it in steps
Right.
over years or.
Will
Okay.
this identify potential grant opportunities through that process?
The Marshall Park
No.
or
30 School Street.
30 School Street. As far as the engineering,
Yeah, through the engineering process and going out to bid and that whole process, is there any look at, are there arts grants or parks grants or?
I think the town would try to do their due diligence on that part as far as
So
grant.
the architects are
Yeah.
gonna do that, that's on the town.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay?
Conclusions. So this budget includes the governor's budget proposal for state aid, which these figures are subject to change. It fully funds all known contractual obligations and increased costs for non-personnel related expenditures. It's balanced budget use upon use of recurring revenues for operating costs, and there's no draw on the stabilization fund or free cash for operating expenses. It maintains existing staff with additional 3 full-time equivalent employees and 6 part-time equivalent town employees. The recommended budget funds the school committee's approved budget, and it leaves an unappropriated balance of approximately $190,000. And it also leaves a balance of approximately $316,000 of free cash that will fall towards next year's free cash. The next steps would be request approval at the annual town meeting on May 7th. The Senate budget is known by the end of May. Conference committee by the end of June. The final state budget is approved by the end of July. And any final adjustments that are needed as a result of any discrepancies between the state budget and what we put in for an estimate for town meeting would be made at the fall special town meeting.
Okay. I am going to stop sharing for a moment. Quick look at the Zoom to see where we're at. Okay, any additional questions or comments from the Finance Committee?
I guess I have,
Yes.
oh, go ahead.
What's the justification behind the part-time IT employee?
That employee will handle the website as far as taking in all the requests for updates for information that needs to be put on the website, as well as the administrative piece for handling, processing invoices that are all IT related as well.
So how many IT personnel do we
Town?
have? Yes.
So we have one full-time employee, we have our consultant, which is outsourced, and this would be a part-time position.
So the new outsourced
And a
company-
remote meeting coordinator, which is a stipend. So, and that's a school employee that receives a stipend for that.
So the new outsourced company is not handling anything with the website?
No.
There, well, part of what we funded though, there's ultimately going to be an update to the website,
Update to the
which
website.
is a technical upgrade, not content management.
Yes.
So actually putting stuff on the website?
Right, so the subtle difference is we need to upgrade the website to a new platform, architect the pages, all that kind of thing. And then somebody needs to do the day-to-day maintenance of updating like if you look at the, Heather and I had a conversation today trying to find a document that.
And I put it in the,
Did you put it in the right place?
in that place
Yeah,
as well.
so.
So.
Trying to navigate our website today can be frustrating. So I think that part of this role will be to help us to manage that content. Right now, if you, for example, if you call the town clerk's office and say, I can't find such and such, unless Ellen knows exactly where to find it, you begin to go, Keystone Cops trying to figure out how to change stuff and where to move it and where to find it and that kind of thing. So my hope would be that we kind of have a single person that we can go to for those types of issues.
Yes. Yep. And I think we're more and more dependent on getting information out there for updates and public announcements and news, that it's more and more needed, that we need that.
Do you have an outlook when the DPW director will be hired?
Hopefully in a couple weeks.
That's good news. Any comments or questions from the public? Or department heads or school committee members,
Chiefs?
chiefs?
Town manager?
I think I've spoken enough.
How many years are left on the turf field payments?
Do you know that?
Top of my head.
That was one of the slides I think I gave in the last presentation. If we can pull it up, the administration, and it covered debt. That's when it was paid off. Was it FY28?
Gotta be getting close.
It's a 10-year note.
10-year plan.
Yeah, it's basically a terminating lease is
So
what I
it's
believe it is. And I
FY28.
believe the field was put in 2018. So you wouldn't know it by looking at it. It looks a lot older than that, but.
That was 700,000.
It was a lot.
Thought it was close to $1 million, right?
Peter, we did just have a telephone join.
Okay,
2029.
2029, I was off by a year. Fiscal 29.
Fiscal 29.
All right, so we'll call it 2018. Yeah, that's something that it's going to be one of those issues that we're going to have to figure out in the coming years of how we're going to manage artificial turf, because I don't think the current solution is the answer, but it is what it is for now. I see a phone number on here, and I had just called for public questions or comments, so if the caller, who I have a rough idea who it is, would like to unmute himself.
Really? What is it, star 9 or star 7?
Still on mute.
Yeah. Mr. Rogers, if you're there, you need to unmute yourself. Anybody know how to do that?
It's either star 7 or star 9, but I don't remember which one.
There we go.
There he
There
is.
it is.
Mr. Rogers.
Mr. Rogers, can you hear me?
I can. I can. Thank you.
I got you. We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, good. Just some general comments, if I could, please. And I want to check my facts. Did someone say that it's going to cost us $45,000 to find out where the water is coming from on Flat Hill?
Yes, that article or that project is in the capital plan. And
Yep.
it was originally supposed to be drainage design work for that hill, for Flat Hill. But then the project kind of morphed into, we need to figure out the source of the water. Because the solution for the drainage would exacerbate the water issue on Page Street and would not meet mass stormwater standards either.
Okay.
Is that a
The reason I asked the question is I can't believe that it is going to take us $45,000 to find out where the water's coming from. I mean, there were contractors in this town that you could take down there and they would tell you in 10 minutes where it's coming from. Okay? And I realize it's only $45,000. But, as I look back on these projects that we're talking about, $50,000 here to study this, and then we find out that it could be $4 to $6 million, and nobody in their right mind would vote for it, and it just goes on and on and on. And the fact that we have this money is not germane to the process, as I understand it. But this is just an this is just an editorial comment. I mean, it's just $4 million to get the 30 School Street squared away. And the fact that it's gone up considerably over the last 5 years. To me is just, we're dragging our feet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I do have a couple of questions on specific parts of the budget. Oh, excuse me, the capital budget, yeah. And I might be off a bit, but, bear with me. $240,000 or $50,000 for a piece of equipment to take care of brush and cut back the sides of the roads and the DPW. And we do have a machine that we're currently using now, but it's not a big machine.
170,000, Mr. Rogers, for that.
170. I'm sorry, I misspoke. So 170 for a process that we have a machine and we have a way to contract this. And now I'm going to go to the most controversial thing, and I'm going to relinquish my license. $65,000-ish for a truck for the police department, so it will pull a trailer that we already have. Why couldn't we get rid of the trailer that we currently have, get the right trailer for the job, and use existing equipment that we have? And for the record, there is not a department that I support more, but there are times that we have to all stand up and ask these kind of tough questions to find out, where the hell we're going. Because, 50 grand here, 60 grand there, 100 grand there, pretty soon, as the senator from Illinois said, $1 million here, $1 million there, pretty soon, it's a lot of money. So those are my issues that I would like to just have somebody to, prove to me that this is a requirement, and are we spending the money where we should be spending? Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of the board.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Always good to hear from you. Do you want to speak to the tractor and police vehicle?
I can. So the tractor was identified by the prior DPW director as a necessary piece of equipment in addition to, right now we have the trackless tractor that it does all our snow removal for our sidewalks and also does mill planing for during paving season. And that piece of equipment is not built to handle the type of growth that, like this piece of equipment that's being recommended in the capital plan. The arm on the trackless is from the old trackless piece of equipment and is unrepairable. It's been broken many, many times because of the wear and tear. And to put our current trackless piece of equipment to continually abuse that piece of equipment in the manner of doing roadside mowing in that manner would shorten the lifespan of that piece of equipment. So that's why this piece of equipment was identified as needed. It's also one of the top concerns that residents call about is roadside mowing. So it's a very important community need to get that done as far as safety goes as well. I'm sure our police and fire chiefs would agree with that for a clear line of sight on our roads. And the other question regarding the truck, that truck, obviously the vehicles that we have are not capable of handling towing capacity that we currently are using them for. They're not made for dealing with that weight and trailer size. The police chief may want to speak more to that as well. And it also aids in assisting. They've been doing a lot of community outreach. So they don't have a vehicle to put a snow blower in one of their regular cruisers and other equipment. Chief?
Actually, Chief, can you hang? What I want to do is, in the interest of time, I'm going to talk about this briefly and then give Chief Gamble one opportunity to retort instead of having to retort twice, if that's okay, Chief.
That works for me. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Okay.
So, with respect to both of those items, with respect to Mr. Rogers' comments, I don't have a problem with the $45,000. I think we need to do, for the Flat Hill project, I think we need to do what we need to do there. And if finding the source of the water so that we can direct it in the right direction is the answer, then I think that hopefully it won't cost $45,000, but if it does, it does. We have to figure that out as best we can, because it's a real problem out there. With respect to the DPW vehicle, and this relates partially to my comments at the beginning of the meeting. We've never owned a vehicle such as this in the history of Lunenburg. We have a farm tractor that we use for a variety of purposes. This would be a dedicated farm tractor with an arm that is controllable by the driver that can cut brush off the side of the road. The town manager's description is correct in terms of the trackless and the attachment that has existed for the trackless, but the history is such that the previous DPW director, when the original request was made for the trackless, included a number of different attachments that trackless could address, including roadside trimming. And I understand the violence of that type of attachment and the fact that the current attachment is not serviceable. The replacement of that attachment would be about $30,000. It's a product that is still marketed today for that vehicle. When you get a new DPW director, I think that it should be expected that there's a honeymoon period where that DPW director would come in and say, this equipment works, this doesn't work, this suits my needs, this doesn't suit my needs. And we received those types of requests this year. For example, also on the capital plan is an appropriation, I believe, for $35,000, give or take, for radios for the DPW vehicles. The previous DPW director, at some point in his tenure, removed the radios that were in the vehicles, and the new DPW director determined that we needed radios in those vehicles. And I did a little bit of investigation, had a conversation with him, had a conversation with the police chief and the fire chief, and am convinced that we need to do this for safety purposes. That makes sense to me. The tractor / mower, it just doesn't make sense to me. And there was a series of emails that were exchanged between myself and the DPW director prior to his leaving, where I asked for a financial analysis on this. And what he gave me was a very simple financial analysis comparing the cost of the vehicle to the cost of going to like a Ray Morin and contracting that work out entirely. And the crossover point was about 6.5 years. And if that was the only possible solution, then that would make financial sense to me, and I would say we should go and do this. But it isn't the only possible financial solution. One other possible financial solution is to buy a $30,000 attachment and do the work you can with that $30,000 attachment, and then contract out the work that you can't do. And I think that a financial analysis that pursues that approach is a reasonable request for somebody who is requesting a substantial financial outlay in equipment. The previous DPW director, and we all saw him standing here, basically explained that he did not do that financial analysis because he did not believe that it was appropriate, and basically would not do it at my request because he didn't think that it was the right tool for the job. I disagree with him. I think that it was a reasonable request. And furthermore, we don't know who the next DPW director is or what his requests are going to be, his or her, excuse me, or what alternatives he or she may bring. And for that reason, at this point, I still am not convinced that we should spend $170,000 on this piece of equipment. Even if it means contracting $40,000 with Ray Morin this year to do the work and revisiting it next year. It's just my personal opinion, but it is what it is. With respect to the police department vehicle, and I agree with Mr. Rogers entirely, I think that we have the best police department in the state. And it's largely attributable to our current chief and our former chief and all the men and women that have worked for them over the last 10 plus years. And I respect their opinions immensely, and I can't say enough about them. But I feel like as a finance committee member, I need to be objective and look at the merits of the request. And the request that was presented, as I understand it, is basically for three purposes, and I'll outline them briefly. The first purpose, as the town manager outlined, and these are not in order, so bear with me. The first purpose is we have a community outreach program to snow blow and sand walkways and driveways for elderly residents that are unable to do that. And the police department owns a snow blower. They're currently, to do this, basically unloading equipment out of the back of an SUV, putting down the handle on the snow blower, loading it into the SUV, and taking it back and forth to elderly residents. Obviously, putting it in the back of a pickup truck would make that easier, and I agree with that. The second reason is for towing purposes. And we currently have 3 trailers that this truck would potentially tow. But before I get to that, I want to be clear that the towing capacity of a hybrid SUV, which is what we're mostly going to for our police vehicles, is about 5,000 pounds, give or take 100 or 200 pounds. And the towing capacity of a Chevy Tahoe, which we still have several in inventory, is about 10,000 pounds, give or take. The total weight of our boat and its trailer is under 5,000 pounds. And we move that boat a handful of times over the course of a summer, currently. The second trailer is the trailer that's used to transport firearms back and forth to the range. I'm sure there are gun racks in it and that sort of thing. And that trailer, fully loaded, is also less than 5,000 pounds. The third use for towing capacity that have been outlined to us is the UTV, which is a vehicle that's used to deal with woods and conservation areas and that sort of thing. Our UTV weighs approximately 3,500 pounds, give or take. We keep that UTV indoors in the garage at the police station, but we tow it with an enclosed trailer that weighs 5,100 pounds. Obviously exceeding the towing capacity of our hybrid SUVs. Now, the combined weight does not exceed the towing capacity of our Chevy Tahoes. It exceeds the towing capacity of our hybrid SUVs. However, it has occurred to me, and it has been backed up by me calling companies that sell trailers, that we could easily trade in this trailer or just buy a new trailer that would get us under that 5,000 pound threshold and maybe walk away with cash when it's all said and done. And so in my mind, I understand the safety concerns of towing something that exceeds the capacity of a vehicle. But I think that there are other alternatives here that we should be looking at that, you know, we may just agree to disagree. In my mind, it doesn't make sense. The last area that the chief outlined to me that I think might have come up in our meeting is our ability just to move personnel, in particular when it comes to going back and forth to a firing range. Currently, we don't have, outside of the chief's and lieutenant's vehicle, I believe, we don't have vehicles that don't have cages in the back. And therefore, you can at most put 2 police officers in a cruiser. And so if you're going to a range with 4 or 5 police officers, you need to run multiple vehicles to the range. Because I wouldn't expect anybody to put a police officer in a cage in the back of a cruiser. And that also makes sense to me. If we didn't have a fleet of 13 vehicles, including 3 vehicles that are currently in reserve. And these are, by definition, police officers are professionals. I mean, they're all licensed drivers, and they can all get themselves to where they need to be. And again, not that I wouldn't want our police officers to all be in the same vehicle going to the range together. In an ideal world, I think that would be great. But it's, nearly $70,000. When you add that number to the number of the tractor at the DPW, we're approaching $240,000. And we're looking at projects down the road that we've talked about tonight where money's really going to matter. And if we could put that money, let's say, in a special purpose stabilization account and not have to worry in future years about overfunding that account to buy fire trucks. Or if we could put that money in the stabilization account to improve our credit standing. Or, God forbid, we have a conversation about not levying to the limit, which is a conversation that we touched upon a few weeks ago. I understand it would have a very minimal effect on everybody's tax bill, but people are complaining about their taxes and their cost of living and inflation right now, and I think that we need to be super careful about every expenditure. We're adding personnel, we're adding equipment. I understand, and I outlined the reason in the draft warrant letter about the good reasons to spend, to the tune of $2 million in the capital plan when we have the money. Like, I totally get that. But I feel like as a finance committee member, I have to be logically convinced that this is the best use of our money. And at this point, I remain unconvinced. And with that, I'm sure Chief Gamble has a thing or two to share with respect to this conversation.
I think we've talked about this quite a bit at my budget hearing. I don't know what else to add to what our conversation was. If there's another question in there, I'll gladly ask it. But again, I'll reiterate everything that you outlined, and that's exactly what we need it for. Those Tahoes that you speak about, there is no braking systems for those trailers. That's not what they're designed for. You can call the Chevy dealer. I'll give you the specs on our Tahoes. There is no braking system in them designed for trailers. You put that trailer on there, you're taking a chance. As for the trailer itself, and you made a phone call, I'm not sure who you called to trade in that trailer. That trailer was purchased with forfeiture money. There's rules that govern that use of the trailer and what we can do with it when we're finished with it. And I don't believe trading in a trailer falls within those rules. That trailer was purchased with drug forfeiture money. We're under specific guidelines, and I don't think that's allowed. I would definitely have to do some research on that. But I think there's multiple use for that pickup truck, not just those things that you outlined. Obviously we talked about this before, that we would obviously put it out there on patrol, especially in excuse me, especially in inclement weather during times like that.
If I may?
Please.
Yep. From my seat in the Capital Planning Committee, committee of 5 people, listened to all the department heads' presentations, vetted their proposals, asked a lot of questions, and through that process determined that it was not the highest need, obviously, on the capital plan this year, but it warranted being put in the position that it did end up on the list, and ultimately we have enough funding for it to be included in the funding for this year. The chief just mentioned about inclement weather. We haven't this past winter had any what I would call major storms, but that doesn't mean we're not going to have them in the future. And the remote areas of this town the narrow roads and especially in the lakes areas, during the height of a major 3-day nor'easter, are not necessarily negotiable with the vehicles that we have available at this time. A 4-wheel drive vehicle such as proposed here would allow the police department to get into those areas, pushing through the snow with no problem whatsoever. So that's another added use that I think is extremely important for that vehicle. Vehicle prices, probably 2 years ago, you probably could have done the same thing for $50,000, but you can't today. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Just a question, Mr. Passios. Are you under the impression that a Ford Explorer hybrid SUV is less capable in the snow than a Chevy Tahoe?
I'm not comparing those two. I'm comparing those two vehicles that you just mentioned to a 4-wheel drive 3/4-ton pickup truck. And it's
Quarter-ton.
excuse me?
It's a half-ton truck.
Either way, half-ton 4-wheel drive vehicle, which is what I drive, it will go through 3 or 4 feet of snow with no problem whatsoever. We'll push right through it. Whereas these other vehicles, I don't believe you will. That's my opinion.
Mr. Beardmore, may I comment on that also, please?
Yes, please, Chief.
In the wintertime too, we have SUVs, and they're all-wheel drive vehicles. And if you've driven on Mass Ave in the winter when it's slushy, all-wheel drive doesn't work that well. We get away with it because we have snow tires on our SUVs. We change out the tires every year. But when you're talking about a major nor'easter, like Mr. Passio said, that it does become difficult. And a pickup truck would make more sense of a realistic 4-wheel drive vehicle. But that's only part of the equation, and I think you're stuck on the trailers and why we need it for trailers. And think of it as an all-around utility vehicle. And I think when you encompass everything all around it, I think it gives you the answers for the convincing that I would think you do. And again, we've always said that we can agree to disagree, and you and I can have conversations for hours and hours on end and go around and around. But at the end of the day, when I look at what our needs for our department are, and that's what I identify as.
One more question for you, Chief, on this. Several times when we've talked about this, you've mentioned the braking capacity of the fleet of the existing vehicles. And again, I want to outline that the towing capacity of our existing vehicles varies greatly. But let's narrow this to the hybrid SUVs right now. Right now, I think the boat with trailer is, I don't recall the exact number, but it's less than 5,000 pounds. It's below the Ford suggested, or the Ford towing capacity of those vehicles, as well as the trailer that we use for the firearms is also below that number. Do you believe that the braking capacity, that those vehicles do not have a safe braking capacity even when they are towing at or below the maximum towing capacity according to Ford?
Pete, I'm not an expert on braking or trailer hitches or whatever it may be. The information that I've got and that I've received on the specs and the bids is that you would actually have to order those SUVs to have a braking system for the trailer pulls. And to my knowledge, we have never done that. We have never ordered SUVs with a braking system on it. So as for your question about being safe, to be quite honest with you, I couldn't answer that question. Do I have a concern about safety? Absolutely. when you start putting weight on vehicles like that are not designed to tow those items that we had talked about, I think you're taking a chance.
Okay, I mean, it's a fair point. It is what it is. It is what it is, and we're going to have different opinions on this. I've come
As
at,
usual.
clearly, I've come at this from the published towing capacity of a vehicle includes not only the chassis and the engine, but also includes the brakes. And Ford and General Motors are highly regulated companies that are regulated by the NTSB and the DOT, and that's what I have to go on. But if there's more information available than that, then I think we should consider it.
I thought I gave you something, some paperwork from the specs that we had, because they're designed to be cruisers, not your typical personal vehicle for towing or use. But if not, I can get that to you.
Okay. All right. Well, I've taken up enough time on this.
So just, I would like to add on the Flat Hill drainage, one return on investment thing to look at is, I think the life cycle of Flat Hill Road, because of the drainage issues there, probably is significantly reduced. It was paved only a few years ago, and it is starting to crack and crumble and break at the sides. So there is drainage. It's actually getting under the road. We did do that site walkabout on Saturday for about 2 hours, and there is a lot of water flowing from a lot of places in that area. So to pinpoint, and we had a civil engineer out there, maybe two, and it wasn't clear to them, and they're in the profession, as to where all the water was coming from. You put in top of it retention basins, and are they doing the right outflows? There's a lot of engineering that can be done in that area to try to pinpoint the sources of the water, and then potentially what can be done with it. Ultimately, maybe nothing can be done with it without some, waivers from the DEP or something as to how we can pump that into Beaver Brook at the Shirley line or something. I also, on the 170,000 utility tractor, my mind's not made up. We need that, and given a new DPW director, and that's kind of the reason I asked when we might have them. They may come in with a whole different attitude on this, so I would kind of like to see their take on it before we take a position on that 170,000. And I do kind of agree that if what we're talking about is kind of, the thicker diameter brush that builds up, if you deal with that on a yearly basis, you don't get to the thicker brush that would be needed for this. And I deal with the same thing. My driveway is 800 feet long, and I'm constantly dealing with it. But sometimes I just have to pull out a chainsaw and cut some stuff down, and chainsaws are a few $100s. So I tend to think that we do need the truck in the arsenal, and the amount of times just on my personal that I wish I had a truck to do things. Police are called into strange situations at times, and having a bed of a truck may be of benefit to something that pops up. So I see benefit in having that in the fleet of vehicles. I don't think you have to go one size fits all on all the vehicles. So that's my take on those three, and perhaps I'm not ready to make a decision tonight when we go to vote, because I'd like to hear from DPW on the 170.
This is my first year on the finance committee, and my prior life, I always, when we were doing budgets, I always look at the manager of the department, and they're the experts. They know what the right thing to do is, and but I also would like to get, if I'm concerned, I would always like to get some backup information. And as far as the police vehicle, from what our chairman has talked about, I'm not sure of the value of it. And as far as the mower, like our vice chair, I think while the prior department head was here and he made a strong case for it and said that buying an additional, that piece of equipment that we could buy at $30,000, he said that's just not going to do the thing for us. He was pretty clear about it. So, but if we're going to have a new person, maybe they have a different perspective. Maybe they do things differently. So I think those are maybe things at $170,000. It would be prudent to wait to see, and maybe that person would say, yes, we definitely need this piece of equipment. Then I would probably agree with that person and move ahead. But right now, I kind of agree with our vice chair on that.
Just add, so we're not going to have a DPW director in place for your next public hearing, for sure. So that's not.
So when you said 2 weeks, you didn't mean 2 weeks from today?
Yeah, did not mean 2 weeks
Ready
from
and armed
today.
with an opinion about?
Yeah,
No?
that was like
Okay.
general, couple of weeks.
Is this an interview question? What's your thought?
What do you think about a $170,000 piece of equipment that some people don't like?
Yeah. What I would also add to that, we don't have an appropriation within the budget for outsourcing that. And as well as, I think what's also important, besides just your director's opinion, is people actually using the equipment, seeing how hard that piece of machinery handles that when it's in operation.
And
It's
that-
violent. That's
where
the word that's described.
The leader of
Yeah.
that group,
Yes.
the manager, would be the person that would would tell us about that.
Right, the
Now,
foreman.
again, being my first year, how does that handle if we look at these things, we're later going to talk about this, do we say, is it thumbs up and thumbs down for everything, or?
Yeah, it's a single article, which makes it a difficult decision. I mean, which is kind of why I'm undecided, sitting here still, right? I have a serious problem with 2 items on this capital plan, but it's an all or not. Now, let me, and then
Amendments could be made, right?
amendments can be made, and the Finance Committee retains the right to be the first to propose amendments on moneyed articles like this. So we could, one scenario is we vote to recommend disapproval, and then we bring forth amendments at town meeting that could ultimately garner our recommendation to approve it, right? That will make the month of April a very interesting month for us if we don't go down that route. But that is a potential scenario. Another potential scenario would be, we could defer and wait to town meeting. We don't even have to, we don't have to make a recommendation really until town meeting, although ideally we'd get it on the warrant or be armed with a recommendation prior to. But it is the capital plan is you're voting on the whole thing.
Right.
Dave, did you have a thought on that?
Unfortunately, I missed a meeting that I had scheduled with town council this past Monday. I realized on Tuesday, and I was going to discuss this exact issue with him, so I hope to maybe discuss it with him before at least town meeting. I disagree that an amendment from this committee on the capital plan would accomplish what you're trying to do. Now, this is just my understanding and has not been verified, that you can reduce the amount of funding authorized for the capital plan, but you cannot specifically pick and choose on that list what gets funded and what does not get funded. That's my understanding. And I do believe that's correct because the issue has come up in the past.
Okay. Out of curiosity, did you have that opinion when you seconded my amendment proposal a couple of years ago to defer items at to the special town meeting?
Yes, actually, I did have that information.
Yet you seconded the amendment to remove items from the capital plan.
I honestly don't remember that, but I probably did. In
Well, I tend to
very unusual times, too.
It was, yeah, admittedly.
Yes.
I I tend to remember having discussions at town meeting on capital plan items specifically and amendments being made. And if we did remove $170,000 as one example, with the prevalent discussion during town meeting from the town being, remove it for that reason, and then the town went ahead and reduced the overall budget and went ahead and spent it anyways, I don't know,
That's the way the charter's set up. If you don't like it,
you have a
I understand
you have a
your
charter, and then
individual.
you have like.
I understand your individual concerns, and the only way to correct that, if you feel it is not, I'm not going to say this right, but ultimately, if you disagree with the process, then you need to go back to the charter and change the charter, which was changed 20 years ago to put this particular process in place, and has worked very fine, and everybody's been pretty much comfortable with the way the process has gone for 20 years, including through a review and updating of the charter.
I don't think we're discussing anything that would violate the charter. I've read the charter. I can't see anything in the charter that number one, steers the finance committee away from the capital plan, or number two, gives town meeting the ability to amend the capital plan to its heart's content. I understand the roles of the committees to include the capital planning committee, but I don't think that the capital planning committee, which is largely appointed by committees in the executive branch of the government, to dictate what the legislative branch does on an article. The legislative branch has total control of that article once it comes up. That's, again, my opinion. We could hash that out with town
That's
council,
fine,
but
and I won't.
Town council, you said?
I plan to. I had hoped to have it this past Monday, but that was my error.
That'd be a good thing to know.
Yeah, and I think it'll be an easy answer for him because he has been posed this question in the past.
And he will give an opinion.
I'm sure he will.
And it is an opinion.
Very long. Okay. Any other comments or questions from either the public or the committee pertaining to all items relating to financial matters of the town of Lunenburg?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is Tom.
Yes, sir.
I had a question for Mr. Passios, actually, and this involves the air conditioning for the classrooms
Yes.
at the primary school.
Yep.
Can you repeat what you said earlier about the total cost? Because right now, I think it's $230,000. Were you saying that to fully enact that project could be, almost double of that?
Let's make sure I answer this correctly. The present dollar amount that is in the capital plan was derived from a dollar amount to install the exact condensers that were spec'd for the building when it was originally built. The engineers that we hired, and I don't remember what the dollar amount was to do the engineering work to bring this proposal forward, came back with a recommendation that the condensers should be larger than originally spec'd, and thus would require an upgrade of the electrical system to feed them. And that's where the additional cost is. First of all, in the upgrade of the electricity, the electrical feed to them, which would require a sub-panel. And secondly, units that have more capacity than the original design. And I asked the school department to go back and really do a deep dive on this and make sure that if indeed they go forward with the lower dollar amount, that it's going to accomplish what they intend for that building. There was also a comment, just a brief comment made that in that deep dive that they're going to make, they need to make sure, or somebody has questioned the flow capacities, and I don't know if that's of the existing system as it stands right now, or the effects on that system when the evaporators or condensers, whatever they are added. So that's the best explanation I can give you, that the added cost is for larger units, or at least upgraded units from what was originally spec'd, what is that, 17 years ago now?
20.
And the fact that they would require more power than the original units that were specified. The school department is also going to search back through the records and try to get the original number that was saved by removing those from the original project, just for another data point to be available.
And obviously, we don't have any of that information tonight, so that's,
Yeah, but my point here is, are we, in the capital plan, there's the 230,000. I mean, that doesn't sound like that's a fully baked number. Am I right?
I think the answer, Tom, is we don't know. So, you know, I feel like we need more information on that one as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's a fully baked number if, after the second dive into the engineering on it, they determine that, yes, the smaller units will do what they are looking to accomplish, and there's no need for an electrical upgrade, then that number's good. It's the other scenario that needs to be vetted fully.
And do you know when we'll know that?
I do not at this point. I believe one of the comments that the superintendent said to me personally is that we are going to do it correctly, whether it's the way it's designed now or the way it really needs or should have been designed.
Okay. Tom, are you good with that answer for now?
Yeah, I think so, but I guess if this gets approved in the capital plan, and then there is a pretty major cost increase, what is the next step there? Is this an additional capital request the following year or later in the year?
Yeah, so there are 3 scenarios in my mind, but the town manager can certainly correct me. Scenario number 1 is the school department could determine that they have the money to make up the difference in their own budget through end-of-year funds or something along those lines that the school committee has the power to appropriate. The second scenario would be that we come back to a special town meeting or an annual town meeting for an additional appropriation. Actually, there's 4 scenarios. The third scenario is that unexpended capital funds from other unexpended capital projects could be transferred to this to make up the delta. And the fourth is we just don't do it, and the money comes back in free cash.
I'd agree with that. I don't know if town manager has any other, yeah.
Heads are nodding, so.
Yep.
After 3 years, I'm learning my way around municipal finance.
All right, thank you.
Wait till you're on year 12.
I know. God forbid. All right. I just had one additional question for the town manager. You had mentioned that with respect to the DPW tractor, that there isn't money appropriated in the budget for outsourcing for vegetation, road vegetation in the FY23 budget. Are we expecting to buy this tractor and have it delivered on July 1st?
So I was just pointing out that you're talking about outsourcing totally for that, which that's not something that we typically do.
Okay. Which is a fair point. Last year, we outsourced, I think, over $20,000 for vegetation, because we had a broken piece of equipment, and that there wasn't a line item there. What I'm more concerned about is in FY23, do we have a plan to do vegetation control? you can't buy a car and get it delivered in a month right now. I don't know about a tractor with a mower. So. Okay. All right. I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Passio, second by Mr. Menard. Roll call vote. Mr. Baelish.
Aye.
Mr. Waters.
Aye.
Mr. Gray.
Aye.
Mr. Passios.
Aye.
Mrs. Simeoni.
Aye.
Mr. Menard.
Aye.
And an aye for myself. We have hereby closed the public hearing. Okay. Discuss and vote on recommendations for annual town meeting warrant articles. So, first of all, so that the intent here will be to literally go through the draft annual town meeting warrant, article by article, and our possible votes include recommend to approve, recommend to disapprove, defer. What the warrant will say is defer to town meeting, but we will have an opportunity to get in another crack at the bat at our next meeting. And the fourth one is to find that there's no financial impact. So we have 4 choices to make on each article. Now, as a matter of how we do this, we have 2 members remote, which means we will have to take a roll call vote on every article. So we want to find a way to do this efficiently. I have a printed copy of the draft annual town meeting warrant, but I also have it on my computer and can share my screen. What would work better for everybody?
Can we get more copies?
Have we printed more copies of the? We have not. So it is in your email, Jay.
I know that, but
Okay.
does the copy machine not work?
Yeah, it probably does. I'm not plugged into it, but I could pull a staple and you can run a copy.
Yeah, please.
Or somebody can pull a staple.
This one's not stapled.
Oh, that's just the
No, that's
summary.
just the
That's the
summary.
summary
Oh,
doc.
okay.
This is the whole shooting match.
Yeah.
You want to run that?
Can I get Thank you.
Sure.
Put it in the order.
No. All right. We will pause for a minute while we all watch Mr. Simeoni attempt to run a copy machine.
Can we get a play-by-play?
Can we move the camera over there?
Does this go against finance committee budget?
It's making noise. Whoops, 4,000 copies? Where'd it go? Yeah. That's got to be a first. Okay. Wait till you see the video when it's posted.
Awesome.
That will be reflected in the minutes, right?
All right. So I'm assuming now I can forgo sharing my screen, which will make things a lot easier for me as I'm trying to get through this. Is that okay with everybody?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Here we go. My favorite part of the year. Article A. Madam Town Manager, do you want to help us with this? Or so Article A, now,
We have numbers now?
let's be close by. We don't have numbers yet. So Article A is to receive reports from committees.
You usually say no direct financial
We usually
impact.
say no direct financial impact on this.
I would agree.
Okay. We have to take a roll call vote.
Can we lump all the no financial impacts together and vote on
Well, I
this
think
one?
that might be a heavy lift.
Be faster just to run down the list.
Or they do a
one
roll
by
call
one.
vote?
So you're saying go down the list, figure out what has no financial impact, and just do one vote for all of them?
Yeah, I mean, aren't they all just DNAs?
All right,
No.
No, I was thinking that we do them in order separately, because,
I agree.
you know,
I agree.
I have differences of opinions.
Well, I'm usually a fan of efficiency. I think in this case, we probably, okay.
Yep.
So do we have a motion to find no financial impact on Article, oh, interestingly, it has a number on this one, but a letter on this one. Article
This-
A.
So move.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Passios, a second by Mr. Gray. This is a roll call vote to find no financial impact on Article A. Mr. Baelish,
Aye.
Mr. Waters,
Aye.
Mr. Gray,
Aye.
Mr. Passios,
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni,
Aye.
Mr. Menard,
Aye.
and an aye for myself. We recommend no financial impact unanimously. Article B, to reauthorize revolving funds to the tune of $266,000. Do I have a motion to recommend approval, maybe?
I was about to say that. So moved. Easier to do that.
We have a motion, we have a motion from Mr. Passios. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Mr. Simeoni. Mr. Waters,
Aye.
Mr. Baelish,
Aye.
Mr. Gray,
Yes.
Mr. Passios,
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni,
Aye.
Mr. Menard,
Aye.
and an aye for myself. Okay. Article 3, an article to pay a prior year expense to the tune of $500. Do we have a motion to recommend approval?
Motion to approve.
Motion from Mr. Simeoni.
Second for just one question.
Second from Mr.
Discussion.
Passios. Discussion.
Yep, just a quick question. Do you expect anything,
Any other?
excuse me, anything else to pop up suddenly that is not included here?
I do not expect anything, and nor does Karen.
Okay,
so-
thank you.
Any further discussion? Roll call vote. Mr. Baelish,
Aye.
Mr. Waters,
Aye.
Mr. Gray,
Aye.
Mr. Passios,
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni,
Aye.
Mr. Menard,
Aye.
an aye for myself.
So I assume you'd want to defer until town meeting on this, or,
Okay, Article 4/D, amendments on appropriations and sources of funds for FY '22. This is a TBD, so we are going to defer on Article 4. Everyone all right with that? Do we need to vote on a defer?
it's for the minutes purpose, maybe.
Yeah, probably. All right.
I move we defer on Article 4.
Second.
Passios moves, Mr. Simeoni seconds, Mr. Baelish,
Aye.
Mr. Waters,
Aye.
Mr. Gray,
Aye.
Mr. Passios,
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni,
Aye.
Mr. Menard,
Aye.
and an aye for myself. We defer. Article 5/E, an article for the clerical collective bargaining agreement to the tune of $15,303. Is there a motion to approve? A motion from Mr. Gray. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Mr. Passios. Any discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Baelish,
Aye.
Mr. Waters,
Aye.
Mr. Gray,
Aye.
Mr. Passios,
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni,
Aye.
Mr. Menard,
Aye.
and an aye for myself. We have approved unanimously. We recommend approval unanimously. Article 6/F. The capital plan.
we have a little discussion
I think we
before
should.
any motion is brought?
I think we should.
Yeah. I'd just say personally that I would move to approve, but I understand the concerns of a couple other members of this committee, so I'd like to hear what you guys would like to do.
I think my preference would be to defer and perhaps get DPW to weigh in on it, as well as hear, the only person who seemed to attend the public hearing had an issue with this one as well, so I'd probably like to hear what the rest of the town thinks on this one.
I would defer.
I would also.
I'd also be curious what the town council had to say when he does talk with Dave, because I think that's a great idea.
All right, I think that's fair. This is going to be our one controversial item this year, so we might as well extend it out to the 7th of May and have fun, right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Is there a motion to defer on Article F/6?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Motion for Mr. Gray, a second for Mr. Simeoni. Any
One
further
other question
discussion?
for the chair,
Yes, Mr. Passios.
is that even if we vote to defer now and we get further information between now and the public hearing in April, we could potentially vote to
Yes.
approve or disapprove then.
Yes.
Okay.
And we potentially have even another meeting before
After
town
that.
meeting. So, we can take, I don't intend to have another public hearing, but we can take action
Right,
at that meeting.
right.
So,
Okay.
But it just
Yeah,
won't
that,
go
that
in the
was,
mail.
that was my question as well. So I just wanted to make sure this deferral wasn't a final vote.
nope, we can have a crack at any single one of these.
Great.
Okay, any further discussion? We have a motion to defer. Mr. Baelish,
Aye.
Mr. Waters,
Aye.
Mr. Gray,
Aye.
Mr. Passios,
Abstain?
Mr. Simeoni,
Aye.
Mr. Menard,
Aye.
and an aye for myself. So we have a defer. 5, 6,
The one.
0, 1. Article 7/G. G? Yes. Okay, so this is the administrative organization plan. This is what we heard about tonight, I'm assuming?
No,
Oh.
this is related to the facilities director position, so I'd assume you want to defer.
We have an article for that?
Yes,
Why?
it's a requirement.
New position, new department.
Oh, all right.
Per the charter.
Okay, yeah, I think we want to defer.
Motion to defer.
Is there a second?
Wait, why do we want to defer? What?
Because we haven't heard anything about it yet?
Oh, I thought we had.
They may want a tractor.
Not if he wants a tractor. No. All right, I'm fine with defer.
All right, so did we have a motion in a second?
Second.
Okay.
Yeah, most-
We have
What
a
are we
mo-
doing?
We're deferring on
Motion to defer.
Article 7/G, which is the administrative organization plan for the facilities director,
Which is to create the position.
which is to create
and-
the position as outlined by the town charter.
But the funding is,
Department.
and fund it?
No, the article is just about the organization,
Right, and the
As-
funding for
is
that
in the
position is in,
the budget, under the
At-
facilities and grounds.
okay, not in salary reserve. It's actually a line item.
Yeah.
Yes, yep, we've discussed it,
Yeah.
in the budget
So if
process.
we don't approve it, we can take out the money.
So is that why it has a financial impact? If we don't approve it, then the money is not going to be spent?
Yeah, I mean, it's a,
Right, so, okay.
Major
I just want to make
position.
sure it's not
Yeah.
no financial impact, but I guess it does.
When will we hear?
I would prefer to go into town meeting
The
and
public
in the
hearing
warrant
is
as
the 12th.
supporting this. We've been, excuse me, behind the 8 ball and not having a facilities department for many, many years. I think everybody, at least I'm well-versed on why this is here. If you guys feel you're not, then I understand why you want.
okay, so let me, to be clear, we have a motion right now to defer, so this is discussion on that motion.
Correct.
as presented to us tonight, to see if the town will vote to approve a reorganization of the Public Works Department in accordance with the reorganization plan entitled Administrative Organization Plan dated April 5th, 2022, and accompanying message of the town manager both on file at the office of the town clerk and select board under the authority provided for in Article 5, Section 1B of the town's charter, or take any action relative thereto. The writing of this has been approved by town council. We just have not seen the presentation.
We haven't seen the plan.
Correct, and I have to file a plan on April 5th and hold a the board will hold a public hearing that will be on the 12th.
The select board?
Yes, select board.
And this will outline all the duties like we've talked about.
Right.
Do they cover
Right.
grounds? Do they cover?
Right.
Okay. And then we can talk
So
about
that's
it
why-
on the 14th.
I would defer because that you haven't seen
The plan.
the plan.
I
I
agree.
think you know what the intent is.
And there's no, there's
So we can basically
No
listen
money.
to that public hearing and then
So-
at the town meeting, make a vote.
And you have your April 14th.
I think we want to
public
defer,
hearing.
Mr. Passios.
Okay.
And I completely agree with the sentiment that you just shared.
Yep.
I think that there may be a very good reason to defer on this.
Okay.
Okay.
I mean, quite often our deferrals are to hear the information at town meeting.
Right. That would not be the
We-
case here. We're going to hear it on the 12th.
Right. And we may still decide at that point that we want to hear the sentiment at town meeting, or we may approve it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we'll bring
Yeah,
it
we're
back
good.
on the 14th at our meeting, but it'll be discussed at the select board meeting on the 12th.
But the votes that we take tonight are what's going to
Oh, I
be in the
completely
warrant.
agree. I'd prefer to have more decisions, recommendations in the warrant,
Yep.
because we've been criticized for deferring in the past. So I agree with you,
Yep.
but I think in this case, we want to defer.
Okay.
Criticized us.
yeah.
Those people on social media.
Oh, my gosh.
Vote.
And anything on the internet is
It's all
gospel,
true.
right?
Right. Okay, we have a motion to defer. I'm closing conversation. Roll call vote. Mr. Baelish.
Aye.
Mr. Waters.
Aye.
Mr. Gray.
Aye.
Mr. Passios.
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni.
Aye.
Mr. Menard.
Aye.
And an aye for myself. We are deferring. Okay. Article 8/H. The omnibus budget for FY 2023 to the tune of $41,568,744.92. I just want to, I've taken a moment for this article, the 3 years that I've been on the Finance Committee, because I feel like if there's one thing that the Finance Committee does that's consequential, and it's sort of the culmination of everything we do, it's our recommendation on this article. And I think, as in every other year that I've been on the first year we did this twice. But I think we've done a really thorough job this year in vetting the budget. And it's been a long and somewhat arduous process, but as always, it's a pleasure to work with all of you and with the town manager and with Karen. We don't always agree, but it's always a pleasure to work with all of you. And I'm looking forward to getting through another town meeting with you guys. Any discussion or motions?
I move we vote to approve.
Is there a second?
I'll second for discussion.
Okay, we have a motion for Mr. Passios, a second from Mr. Simeoni for discussion. Mr. Simeoni, do you have a comment?
No, I didn't know if we wanted to discuss.
I'm sorry?
I didn't know if we wanted to discuss.
Oh,
I have the same sentiments as the chair just stated, so that's why I made the motion.
Yes, I do as well. And being the first year through this, I'm very impressed with the thoroughness of the process. And again, kudos to the town manager, the finance director, all of the department heads, and our chair of the finance committee. I think it's been a great process. So I'm in favor.
All right. Thank you. We have a motion. I will make a roll call vote. Mr. Baelish.
Aye.
Mr. Waters.
Aye.
Mr. Gray.
Aye.
Mr. Passios.
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni.
Aye.
Mr. Menard.
Aye.
And an aye for myself. We are recommending approval unanimously. Article 9/I.
I motion that we approve Article 9. This sticks to our best practices and our policy.
So for those following along at home, this is a $100,000 appropriation for the stabilization fund, the regular stabilization fund. Any further discussion? Oh, we need a motion.
I made the motion in my statement.
We have a motion from Mr. Passios, a second from Mr. Gray. Any further discussion? Roll call vote. Mr. Baelish.
Aye.
Mr. Waters.
Aye.
Mr. Gray.
Aye.
Mr. Passios.
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni.
Aye.
Mr. Menard.
Aye.
And an aye for myself. We have recommended to approve unanimously. Article 10/J, the Special Purpose Stabilization Fund, to the tune of $450,000. For those following along at home, the Special Purpose Stabilization Fund is it's another stabilization fund, operates under the same rules, but we are basically earmarking that stabilization fund for capital in out years, in particular, very expensive items like ambulances and fire trucks. Any discussion or motions?
Recommend we approve.
A
Second.
motion from Mr. Gray, a second from Mr. Passios. Roll call vote. Mr. Baelish.
Aye.
Mr. Waters.
Aye.
Mr. Gray.
Aye.
Mr. Passios.
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni.
Aye.
Mr. Menard.
Aye.
And an aye for myself. We have recommended approval on the Special Purpose Stabilization Fund unanimously. Article 11/K, the OPEB Trust Fund. Why do we have, okay, this is different funding sources. So we have $266,696 as a transfer from free cash and $656 as a transfer from sewer retained earnings. And are these both in line with policy, or are we adding to the minimum on policy on these?
The 266,696 is our policy.
Okay.
Sewer, they've identified, I don't really know how.
That was from an actuarial that was done a number of years ago, and they've just done the same amount year after year.
Works for me. Okay. Is there a motion on the OPEB Trust Fund?
So moved.
Motion
Second.
from Mr. Passio, second from Mr. Simeoni. Any discussion?
To approve, by the way, I'm sorry.
I inferred. Any further discussion? Mr. Baelish.
Aye.
Mr. Waters.
Aye.
Mr. Gray.
Aye.
Mr. Passios.
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni.
Aye.
Mr. Menard.
Aye.
And an aye for myself. See, we're racking up these recommendations, Dave.
Yep.
We're not going to look too bad for the people on Facebook. Okay. Article 12/L. The sewer enterprise budget. $1,213,182. This is a anticipated receipts and retained earnings and transfer article. Any motions or discussion?
I move we approve.
Second.
Motion from Mr. Gray, second from Mr. Passios. Any further discussion? Roll call. Mr. Baelish.
Aye.
Mr. Waters.
Aye.
Mr. Gray.
Aye.
Mr. Passios.
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni.
Aye.
Mr. Menard.
Aye.
And an aye for myself. We are recommending approval unanimously. The Sewer Capital Reserve Stabilization Fund, $35,548.86 transferred from retained earnings. We have a motion or discussion.
I move we approve.
Second.
Motion from Mr. Passio, second from Mr. Simeoni. Any further discussion? Roll call vote. Mr. Baelish.
Aye.
Mr. Waters.
Aye.
Mr. Gray.
Aye.
Mr. Passios.
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni.
Aye.
Mr. Menard.
Aye.
And an aye for myself. We have recommended approval. 7-0. 7-0. All right. Article 14/N. Yes, yes. The Solid Waste Disposal Program Enterprise Budget for $302,000. Any discussion or motions?
Move to approve.
Recommend.
Recommend approval. Mr. Waters has motioned to recommend approval. Is there a
Second.
second? A second from Mr. Simeoni. Any discussion? Hearing none. Roll call vote. Mr. Baelish.
Aye.
Mr. Waters.
Aye.
Mr. Gray.
Aye.
Mr. Passios.
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni.
Aye.
Mr. Menard.
Aye.
And an aye for myself. We have approved 7-0. Water Enterprise Budget, $25,000 in Water Enterprise revenues. Is there a motion?
Move to recommend approval.
Second.
Second from Mr. Gray, motion from Mr. Passios. Any discussion? Roll call vote. Mr. Baelish.
Aye.
Mr. Waters.
Aye.
Mr. Gray.
Aye.
Mr. Passios.
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni.
Aye.
Mr. Menard.
Aye.
And an aye for myself. Article 16/P, PEG access budget. So what I learned today is that this is the direct costs of the PAC as opposed to the indirect costs, which are like insurance and health insurance and that sort of thing. So this is the money that goes directly to PAC for their operations from the enterprise account that is funded from Comcast.
So the revenue comes in from Comcast, but has to be appropriated through this vehicle.
Right.
Right, and the indirect costs are covered under the
Omnibus.
omnibus budget.
Just clarification, it's funded by Comcast cable subscribers.
You are correct.
Correct.
I stand corrected,
Comcast ain't doing.
A diminishing number, too.
which I am not one of.
I was going to say that, but I
Glad to spend your money.
move to recommend approval.
Second.
We have a motion from Mr. Passios, a second from Mr. Menard. Any discussion? Roll call vote. Mr. Baelish.
Aye.
Mr. Waters.
Aye.
Mr. Gray.
Aye.
Mr. Passios.
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni.
Aye.
Mr. Menard.
Aye.
And an aye for myself. We are approving running PAC for another year. Recommending approval for unanimously. Okay. Article 17, care improvement and embellishment of town cemeteries.
Lots.
For $10,000. This is Article Q on the draft warrant for those who are following along. Is there a motion?
Recommend we approve?
Second.
We have a motion from Mr. Gray, a second from Mr. Simeoni. Any discussion? Roll call vote. Mr. Baelish.
Aye.
Mr. Waters.
Aye.
Mr. Gray.
Aye.
Mr. Passios.
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni.
Aye.
Mr. Menard.
Aye.
And an aye for myself. We have recommended approval unanimously. Article 18. I lost my place. R. This is the Woodruff property cleanup for $100,000, a transfer from free cash. Any discussion or motions?
Make a motion to recommend approval.
We have a motion.
Second.
Second from Mr. Passios, motion from Mr. Menard. Any further discussion, or any discussion? Seeing none, roll call vote. Mr. Baelish.
Aye.
Mr. Waters.
Aye.
Mr. Gray.
Aye.
Mr. Passios.
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni.
Aye.
Mr. Menard.
Aye.
And an aye for myself. We have recommended approval unanimously. Article 19/S. An article to fund demolition and engineering of 30 School Street, formerly known as the primary school, or the old primary school, for $450,000, a transfer from free cash. Do we have any discussions or motions?
Move we approve, recommend to approve, excuse me, and get this done.
Second.
We have a motion from Mr. Passios, a second from Mr. Gray. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Baelish.
Aye.
Mr. Waters. I'm sorry, you didn't come across there, Evan.
Aye.
Mr. Gray.
Aye.
Mr. Passios.
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni.
No.
And Mr. Menard.
Aye.
And an aye for myself. All right. We have dissension. We have recommended approval 6-1.
Such a goal.
Yeah, I like that. I don't want to be like a rubber stamp committee here. All right. Article 20. Amendment to the Code of Lunenburg, Chapter 70, Salary Administration Plan. Madam Town Manager, can you help me out with this one?
Yes, this is adding positions to the grid that the Personnel Committee already voted on and approved. And it's formalizes their insertion into the salary grid.
So this is,
The Personnel
Assigning
Committee has
grids.
3 articles. This is one of them. So
what does Chapter 70 have to do with this?
that's the section of code, general code of our bylaws.
Oh, this is bylaws. I'm
Yes.
thinking mass general laws.
No. Our bylaw, which is
Like, yeah,
chapter
like,
70.
what?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, got it. Sorry. It's 10 minutes to 10 at night.
This is where we usually argue whether it has impact or
Right.
it doesn't have impact.
Yeah. Is there any discussion or motions?
Heather, you said this just inserts the positions that have been missing from the schedule, is that
Well,
correct?
let me go into
New
specifics then. So there is a meal site manager position currently. That position is being recommended to change from a grade 3 to 6. The fiscal 23 budget includes adding a assistant meal site manager position. So that's a new position being added to the grid.
Mm-hmm.
And the Personnel Committee also approved firefighter advanced EMT call position that was previously not on the grid, and a firefighter paramedic call position that wasn't on the grid because they had no place really.
Okay, so there's a mix of existing and new in that article.
Yes.
So it goes both ways. At a minimum, it does increase or it does affect the budget.
Yeah, so does this all flow down to V where we had that $44,000, Madam Town Manager, that we talked about earlier?
I would say not at this point,
Okay.
meaning you could approve this article and disapprove that one, and you could still have those positions.
Okay.
So these are changes
Oh, I see what you're
irrespective
saying.
of, yeah, irrespective of the new schedule.
All right, so in this one, we're saying the positions, and then later on, we're hitting the schedule.
Right.
basically, right?
Except you moved one position up a step or to a different step.
Right, right. So we're approving the positions to be added to the schedule, and then we're changing the schedule
As far as rate of pay.
as far as rate of pay,
Yeah.
not
Right.
not the
position
grade of the
for one
positions.
salaries.
Correct.
Okay.
And you already voted in favor of the budget, which includes
the money to pay for this.
additional position under Council on Aging.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to recommend approval.
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none. Mr. Baelish.
Aye.
Mr. Waters.
Aye.
Mr. Gray.
Aye.
Mr. Passios.
Aye.
Mr. Simeone.
Aye.
Mr. Menard.
Aye.
Aye for myself. Right. 21/U. This is amendment to Code of Lunenburg, Chapter 70. Schedule A, Salary Administration Plan, FY23 wage schedule. So these are the wages on the schedule. Why is there $50 and a comma on that?
That's a error.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a dollar value
Hello?
associated with this?
British.
Or is this the,
That's to the omnibus budget. That was on one of my slides.
okay.
The 44,000.
Yeah, so this is the
250, I think.
44K. Okay, got it. All right. Any discussion or motions?
We're on you?
We're on 21/U. Yes.
And it's 44K?
The fiscal effect is an additional $44,000, which we've already voted to approve.
Okay. I make a motion to recommend approval.
Second.
We have a motion from Mr. Menard, a second from Mr. Simeone. Any further discussion? Seeing none. Roll call vote. Mr. Baelish.
Aye.
Mr. Waters.
Aye.
Mr. Gray.
Aye.
Mr. Passios.
Aye.
Mr. Simeone.
Aye.
Mr. Menard.
Aye.
And I for myself. Article 22, Amendment to the Code of Lunenburg, Chapter 70, Salary Administration Bylaw. So, this is the very long document that was linked in the email from the town manager a couple of days ago. We got a presentation tonight outlining the changes. I have to confess, I have not read the document. I'm perfectly happy to go on the recommendation of the Personnel Committee on this, but I would respect anybody's other thoughts on this.
I'd like to make a motion that we recommend approval. And if anybody else wants to discuss it, we can do that after we get a second. I have a comment, but I'll wait till the second.
All right.
I'll second.
We have a motion from Mr. Passios, a second from Mr. Simeone. Any discussion? Mr. Passios.
Okay, I have actually listened in on a couple of the meetings. I can't tell you specifically if this was being discussed at the time, but each time that I was listening into this committee's meetings, they were systematically going through the process of trying to get this where it needed to be, and I have total confidence that what they came up with for a finished product is approvable.
Mr. Waters.
While I completely agree with Dave, I find it difficult to, as the Finance Committee, say we approve something that we haven't actually seen that is a moneyed article. It doesn't kind of jive with me for how what our task is as the Finance Committee. I feel like we should have time to go through the document, to look at it, to talk about it once we've had a chance to actually digest it.
Okay. I could go either way on this, but I tend to agree with Mr. Waters. We have a motion on the table that we can vote on. one scenario is that if we vote, it's merely a motion to approve, it is not, so voting against a motion to approve is not equivalent of a motion to disapprove.
Correct.
Meaning if it fails, we still have to vote again for another outcome, either defer or disapprove.
Right.
So,
I would like to ask if there's anybody else that would like to comment as to what their position is.
Yep.
Well, I would,
go ahead,
Go
Tom.
ahead, Evan. All right, so I seriously doubt that I'll have any ultimate reservations with the changes to the document, but, you know, as Mr. Waters has said, I think it's worth taking the time to just go through that and make sure that there's no other implications that we haven't been made aware of or understand. So I would not vote to approve at this, or recommend approval at this time.
Mr. Chair, I withdraw my motion.
Mr. Simeoni, I think you said.
well, yeah, as my wife is on the Personnel Committee, I've listened to most of these meetings, and they've gone into extreme detail, and I have no problem supporting it.
Okay, so you're not withdrawing your second?
No.
Okay, so we have to vote.
Okay.
All right, so we have a motion on the table to recommend approval for the changes to the bylaw.
So just, let me ask, so if we vote, if we don't vote in the majority on this, we can then take another vote to
Yes.
recommend deferral?
Yes. Procedurally, that's how it's done.
Right.
Okay.
All right. Roll call vote. This is a motion to recommend approval. Mr. Baelish,
Nay, no.
Mr. Waters,
No.
Mr. Gray,
No.
Mr. Passios,
Yes.
Mr. Simeoni,
Aye.
Mr. Menard,
No.
and a no for me.
Make a motion, we recommend deferral to the 14th to make, or to
To defer.
defer.
Second?
Okay, we have a motion from Mr. Menard, a second from Mr. Passios to defer on 22/V. Any further
To
discussion?
Well, it doesn't matter, I guess. It's not going in the
It's not going in the warrant, but
warrant.
it will be brought up at our next meeting.
So, just by way of comment, I also know that a lot of time went into this, and it was very thorough, and, but I do think a thorough, time to review it is in order, and I think we only got it yesterday or today or something, so, I fully expect we will recommend approval. It's just we need that time to do homework.
I wholeheartedly agree.
And we don't live at Jay's house, so we don't hear the meetings.
Or have no life and sit in there?
Yeah, or your Dave Passios.
Dave, we gave up on you.
All right. We have a motion to defer. Mr. Baelish,
Aye.
Mr. Waters,
Aye.
Mr. Gray,
Aye.
Mr. Passios,
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni,
No.
Mr. Menard,
Aye.
and an aye for myself. So we are deferring 6-1. Creation of a 300th anniversary of the town and appropriation for initial expenses. We don't have an appropriation for this.
Correct.
Okay, so we kind of need to defer this.
Just,
Move we
Tuesday.
defer?
Is there a second?
Second?
We have a motion to defer from Mr. Passios, a second from Mr. Simeoni. Any further discussion? This is Article 23 slash, I've lost my place.
W.
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 Any further discussion? Mr. Baelish,
Aye.
Mr. Waters,
Aye.
Mr. Gray,
Aye.
Mr. Passios.
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni,
Aye.
Mr. Menard,
Aye.
and an aye for myself. We are deferring unanimously. Okay, 24/X. This is where we start killing trees. This is the recommendation to amend the general bylaws of the town of Lunenburg. We have not discussed this. Any comment,
And
Madam Town Manager?
that's the detail that I have.
Wife was on the bylaw committee, so
Tread lightly.
So I can't really tell you much.
they spend a lot of time talking about things, and you read this thing, a lot of them is just grammatical changes and things like that.
So I think as a matter of consistency, given that we just received this today, I think we should defer on this, read it, and come back in 2 weeks and get around a little bit. Is that all right with everybody?
We do have that document?
It's in the draft ATM warrant that you received today, I believe.
In its entirety?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, not the entire bylaws.
No, but the article with the amended, with the changes. Now, when you're dealing with an amended bylaw, what appears in the in the warrant is it's like reading it's like reading just your parts in a play, right? Without the context of the rest of the other lines, right? So what we actually ought to have, I'm glad you brought this up, is an edited version with
Which does
with the red line.
exist,
Yeah.
so I can,
I had actually requested that as Board of Selectmen's meeting, I believe a month ago.
yeah, and the town clerk has that.
But we asked for it to be posted on the town website. I have honestly not looked for it, but I'm assuming it's not there.
Yeah.
All right, so can we make that request to get a red-lined version of this section, or the entire, oh, I guess it's all the bylaws. Oh, my God. That's a lot of reading, folks.
I
Is
think,
there anything
like Tom
substantial
said, I
or
think a
just
lot of it
housekeeping?
is grammatical.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and,
Have you read it all, Heather?
No.
The changes?
no,
Okay.
I made certain recommendations.
The only other comment I'll make is what financial impact do we feel it would have on the budget?
Well, I don't know.
Having not read it.
That's valid. That's valid. I have more concerns from another perspective than financial, but I don't argue that point. So what-
should we,
I move
recommend
we-
we defer,
Second?
A motion for Mr. Gray, a second for Mr. Passios. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Baelish.
Aye.
Mr. Waters.
Aye.
Mr. Gray.
Aye.
Mr. Passios.
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni.
Aye.
Mr. Menard.
Aye.
And aye for myself. Okay. So sewer amendment, sewer bylaw amendment, which is 25/Y. So I actually had a discussion with the chairman and administrator of the sewer commission today on this. And I received this, I received this afternoon. Similar scenario, and had a good discussion with them. I don't think that there is any financial impact on this, but I believe the town manager has a question on this that she wants to bring town council, or at least get an opinion from town council. So, to be consistent, I think we should probably defer on this, give it a read,
Check.
hear from the town manager if there's an opinion yet. It's not in your email?
Going forward to the next planning board arc.
Okay, and discuss it on the 14th.
Sounds good.
All right,
I move we defer.
is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion from Mr. Passios, a second from Mr. Menard. Any discussion? Roll call vote, Mr. Baelish,
Aye.
Mr. Waters,
Aye.
Mr. Gray.
Aye.
Mr. Passios.
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni.
Aye.
Mr. Menard. And an aye for myself. Okay. 26 slash Z? Yeah, Z. You want to speak to that?
Yes, I'm going to speak in the words of Mr. Barney, because he can explain this much better than I can in planning language. So this is an amendment to section 250-4.15, the non-medical marijuana establishments bylaw. The genesis of this amendment was a legal opinion submitted by Uma Flowers' team. This section, which is part of the submission requirements, was originally written with the intent of having the applicant submit a provisional license from the Cannabis Control Commission. It has been alleged that the wording as written does not mandate that requirement. The planning board requested that town council review this section and make any necessary amendments. Town council has proposed the language in the amendment to clarify the intended requirement, although he's not willing to concede that the current language is not sufficient to mandate the submission of a provisional license.
Okay.
No financial impact.
No financial impact. I don't want to touch this thing with a 10-foot pole.
Even if you
And have this one out of town meeting.
So moved.
Motion from Mr. Passios.
Second.
Second from Mr. Simeoni. Any discussion? Seeing none. Mr. Baelish.
Aye.
Mr. Waters.
Aye.
Mr. Gray.
Aye.
Mr. Passios.
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni.
Aye.
Mr. Menard.
Aye.
And an aye for myself. NFI. Is that our first one? Mm-hmm. Holy smokes.
Second one.
Second one.
Okay.
Article
A
one.
was our
First
first
one, the
one.
committee
Oh, that's
reports.
right. The reports.
It was so long ago, we forgot already.
All right, number 27. Double A? Here we go. Double A, 27. Amendment to the Code of Lunenburg, Section 254.9, Protective Bylaw. Madam Town Manager?
All right, again, in the words of Mr. Burney, this is a series of amendments to section 250-4.9, the Water Supply Protection District. These amendments include the adoption of a newly drawn map of zones 1, 2, and 3 for protection of the public drinking water wells owned and maintained by the Lunenburg Water District, and was created by their consulting hydrogeologist. The alterations to the remainder of the bylaw and the map were requested by the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection and are intended to bring the town's bylaws in line with the CMR that governs public water supplies across the Commonwealth. All of this is a result of the recent request for an increase in the amount of water the district is permitted to withdraw daily.
Do we have the maps?
The map will be on file
NFI.
with the town
Back on the budget.
What?
The map will be on file with the town clerk. Yes.
Would this have any financial impact?
No. Is there a motion?
I move we vote to see no financial impact.
We want to hit.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion to find no financial impact for Article 27/AA. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Baelish.
Aye.
Mr. Waters.
Aye.
Mr. Gray.
Aye.
Mr. Passios.
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni.
Aye.
Mr. Menard.
Aye.
And an aye for myself. So for what it's worth, last year, our chair left with about 5 articles left because they were all no financial impact. So for whatever it's worth, I'm just saying. Article 28/B, amendment to the Code of Lunenburg, Section 250-3.2. Madam Town Manager.
And this one is an amendment to 250-3.2. It will update the zoning map to be consistent with the amendment in the previous article. And this amendment would alter the water supply district, protection district outlined on the zoning map to reflect the current zones 1, 2, and 3 delineated by the Lunenburg Water District's hydrogeologist.
Is there a motion?
I move that we find no financial impact.
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Baelish?
Aye.
Mr. Waters?
Aye.
Mr. Gray?
Aye.
Mr. Passios?
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni?
Aye.
Mr. Menard?
Aye.
And I for myself. No financial impact, unanimous. Article 29/CC. This is a citizen's petition to amend sewer service area map. I'm pretty well aware of this one. Do you have any comments on this, Madam Town Manager? Okay. So the sewer commission received, or the town received, a citizen's petition from a resident of Chestnut Street,
5 Chestnut.
which deals with, basically his property is, the front end of his property is part of the sewer district. The back of his property is not. He wants to build something, a house, I assume, but he cannot do so within the zone. And he's been paying a betterment all along. So it's one of those deals where it's kind of doing the right thing by the resident. I don't think there's financial impact, but I'd be happy to discuss or defer or whatever.
Yeah, this property has actually been, for the same purpose, has been on at least 2 other warrants and withdrawn or passed over.
Maybe it was
At least
withdrawn
once, if
yeah,
not twice
once, I
before
think.
this. Okay, once.
Has the sewer commission said anything about this, or is this?
Yeah, so I believe they have voted to support this, but
They had a meeting, but I honestly never got back to watch.
So I had
that
a conversation with Mr. McDonald about it today, and he was extremely supportive of it. But I can't say 100% that they've voted for it, but if they hadn't, I think he would have told me, so.
one. Yeah.
But I mean, personally, I don't think there's financial impact on this one, so.
I move that we find no financial impact.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion from Mr. Passios, a second from Mr. Simeoni. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Baelish?
Aye.
Mr. Waters?
Aye.
Mr. Gray?
Aye.
Mr. Passios?
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni?
Aye.
Mr. Menard?
Aye.
And an aye for myself. Article 30/DD. A citizen's, I'm sorry, a citizen's petition resolution in support of changing the state flag and seal of Massachusetts.
No financial impact.
Yeah,
Well, we'd have to buy new flags.
that's a fair point. Be
I-
pretty minimal.
I would say that I don't even understand it, because it says whereas, and then it doesn't really, it says adopt this resolution. I don't even understand what it's really asking.
Well, it's be it resolved that the town of Lunenburg hereby adopts this resolution. Oh,
What are they resolving?
to support the work of the special commission relative to the seal and motto. I think it's to support changing the flag.
And sending the resolution to the various reps.
Yeah. I don't think that there's financial impact, particularly since it's a resolution, so it's completely non-binding.
Right.
Is there a motion?
My only comment before I motion is that I'm going to abstain.
Okay.
Otherwise, I make a motion, we find no financial impact.
Second.
So, for the record, I know nothing about this, and this may very well be something that I vote for and support. I really don't know. I suspect that politically it's something that I would lean toward doing, but I don't think it has any financial impact on the town. So, any further discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Baelish. We are voting.
We're voting on no financial impact.
We're voting on no financial impact, yes.
Aye.
Mr. Waters.
Aye.
Mr. Gray.
Aye.
Mr. Passios.
Abstain?
Mr. Simeoni.
Aye.
Mr. Menard.
Aye.
And I for myself. No financial impact. 601. All right.
I don't want to see anyone asking for money for flags.
No flags for you. All right.
If I counted right, we have 5 deferrals right now.
1. Oh, deferrals. Oh,
6.
I can't read my own handwriting. 6.
One on the front.
We've done worse.
Yep.
Okay. Good job, everybody. We just did the hard part. Warrant letter update and discussion. At this late, I had intended to read through the warrant letter. It's at 10:15 at night. I don't have the attention span
You'll put us to sleep.
to read through the warrant letter. Everybody has a copy. I have received a comment from Mr. Baelish that we should perhaps add a sentence of emphasis pertaining to the debt service, outward concern about debt service in pending projects, and move a sentence pertaining to that to the paragraph about the financial condition of the town at the beginning of the letter. In other words, the financial condition of the town is good, but keep reading because there are some concerns that we have, right? So it's basically an emphasis shift. Mr. Baelish, have I just accurately articulated your concern?
That's right, because you make the points well and you articulate them well in one of the bullet points, but it's, 2/3 of the way through the document. So I
Right.
thought that was an important point to just highlight up front.
So I agree. The sentence that you sent to me did not fit well into that paragraph. So I am going to take some artistic license and work on that tomorrow morning and circulate it. And then, assuming nobody objects, we will go with what we got. The due date, I believe, is Tuesday, right? Because Wednesday effectively is the date it needs to go to print. We also need to get the numbers put in and verified by the town manager and the finance director. So I will obviously circulate a final version of that when we have those. That could be as late as Tuesday, though, so just so everybody knows. You both okay with that?
So based on tonight's discussions, do we want to add a sentence on why we chose to defer on the
That's a good question.
capital plan?
That's
at
a good
least?
question.
And then maybe just a statement on the rest of them. We didn't receive it in time to review or something.
Yes, we do. So I will write something to that effect as well and circulate tomorrow.
Okay.
Any further discussion? You follow, does everybody follow what Chris just said? Yeah.
Not entirely, because I might have a issue with it.
So the idea is to add a sentence or a paragraph, because in the document, current document, we spell out the size of the capital plan. But then when you go deeper into the document, you're going to find that the finance committee deferred on the capital plan. So what I think we need is a short explanation that the finance committee has deferred because there are additional items that we believe we need more detail on before we can vote to recommend approval.
Did the nature, I'm trying to remember, I'm getting tired. The nature of our vote this evening give a clear consensus from us that we do still have questions?
It was
Well,
601, right?
I'm just trying to remember.
Yeah, so to my recollection, there's at least 2. So there's the school department, AC, and there's sort of the pending issue around the DPW tractor. we may or may not have a DPW director at any point to clarify that one. But that's why we deferred.
And I think it was also to get clarity on the process of
Yeah.
what we can do as well.
Yeah, I agree with that, Tom. I'm not sure I want to spell that out in the letter.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think I was going to say, I think maybe where Dave's going, I don't want to speak for you, Dave, but I mean, my sense would be to be pretty ambiguous about any specific concerns, but I'm not sure what you have in mind, Peter.
I didn't get the last couple words.
He said he didn't believe that we should spell out specific concerns.
That's where I was going.
And
Yes.
I tend to agree.
Yes.
So the way I would word it, and this is a good discussion to have now before we
Right.
start going around the horn in email and potentially violate open meeting law. So the way I would word it is something to the effect of the Finance Committee has deferred a recommendation on the capital plan because there are additional details that we would like to gather on some specific items, and we intend to have a final recommendation at town meeting, or something to that effect.
I personally think that's even too specific. I'd like
Okay.
to have it say just, we have specific additional information we're looking for on the capital plan.
All right, I better write that down.
Additional information.
Not on specific items?
Correct. No, don't even mention that, just we're looking for additional information and have specific questions on the capital plan. Because the capital plan is the complete document as far as I'm concerned.
Watch this 3-hour meeting for what we talked about.
Yeah.
It's all out in the open.
Listen to these meetings and you'll know what we have questions on.
Won't we at the meeting, at the town meeting, actually have a discussion at that point? in front
If
of
we have not
everybody?
made a recommendation, we will do that
Right,
at
right,
the
so I
town
think
meeting.
that's where you'll be getting all the details of whatever the issues
Well,
are.
but I don't want to say that because we could very well vote on this in 2 weeks or 4 weeks before town meeting.
To approve. right?
And then after
So-
we can just
or whatever
omit
we
that
vote.
part from
Yeah.
the warrant.
So I understand your point. Let me just flesh this out a little bit. In the document right now, we stipulate that we are investing $2 million in capital because we believe that, it's the right thing to do and that sort of thing, right? I can't find the specific language that I wrote. I'm just wondering if that makes a whole lot of, if the next sentence is, but we still have questions about it.
I was formulating something in my head that said something like, at the time of publication, the committee still had some concerns and requests for further information. I don't know if that's appropriate in there or not.
Still think just saying on a couple of specific items is fine. I mean, that is what we talked about.
All right, let me read this paragraph to you guys. Just according to this year's recommended capital plan, this year's recommended capital plan, funded by free cash, tax revenues, and unspent capital appropriations from previous years, is $2,162,849. It is an unprecedented investment of available funds without incurring any additional debt into the capital infrastructure that supports our town. So whatever sentence we're going to put after that, or we're going to change it.
Honestly, I wouldn't add, personally, I don't see any reason to add anything else. We will make our individual preferences known at every meeting between now and town meeting, and at town meeting,
Okay.
itself.
So to be clear, though, I mean, so it says this year's recommended capital plan. It's ambiguous as to who's making the recommendation. But I kind of, I see where you're coming from, Dave. So what I would say is the Finance Committee.
Do you take out the recommended somehow? I don't
Yeah,
have it
we
in front of
could,
me.
we could X out the word and just this year's capital plan. We could say something to the effect of the Finance Committee is continuing to discuss the capital plan throughout the month of April, in the month of April, and we'll have a final recommendation at town meeting.
That's accurate, so I think that's good.
Well, at or prior to town meeting.
Yeah.
It should pique people's interest to watch it.
Yeah. Boost the ratings.
Rob,
Cliffhanger. Okay. Any other questions or comments on the warrant letter? Minutes. We have one set of minutes. We can defer or vote.
I'm ready to vote on it.
I didn't read them.
I'm ready to vote.
I can vote. I read it.
Okay. I'm not looking at them, and I don't remember the date on those minutes.
17th.
It was March 17th?
Yeah.
Okay.
I might have read them.
Do we have a motion on the minutes from March 17th?
Make a motion to approve the minutes from March 17th.
Is there a second?
A second.
We have a motion from Mr. Menard, a second from Mr. Baelish. Any further discussion? Roll call vote. Mr. Baelish.
Aye.
Mr. Waters.
Aye.
Mr. Gray.
Aye.
Mr. Passios.
Aye.
Mr. Simeone.
I'll abstain.
Mr. Menard. And a yes from myself. Minutes are approved, 6-0-1. Committee reports.
Yeah, very quickly with the hour that we're in here. Excuse me, Parks Commission met Tuesday evening. We had extensive discussions about the beach season and the beach building. At this point, we are moving forward with the anticipation that the building will not be usable for the entire beach season this summer. Working on figuring out where portable facilities could be placed, so on and so forth. The building, I believe, is going to end up being assessed way beyond or more thoroughly than just the front wall to make sure that we do this project efficiently and to the scope that it needs to be done. So that's pretty much where that stands. We are determined that the beach will open on time, and there's a few moving parts to this that we still need to work out. Green Communities met last evening. We're coming up against an April 14th April, Heather, the application date 22nd for Green Communities?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so the deadline for the application is April 22nd. We will be meeting again on April 14th to review the finalized projects, and Heather is going to be the point person for actually getting the application completed this year. One comment I would like to make is that we are strongly committed to make sure that the streetlight project moves forward in the next 1 or 2 grant rounds, because if it doesn't, there is movement in what Green Communities is covering under the grants, which is moving away from outdoor lighting. So we need to get this to happen soon.
Moving away from what?
Outdoor lighting projects,
That would be bad.
yes.
Okay. Any other committee reports? Hearing none. Is there any public comment? Anybody still awake? Hearing none. Items for future meetings. We've got 3 meetings in the agenda, a public hearing on the 14th, another meeting, should we need it, on the 28th, an annual town meeting on May 7th. Are there any specific agenda items anybody wants to request? You know, I'll know where to find me. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
A motion for Mr. Menard, a second for Mr. Passios. Mr. Baelish,
All right.
Mr. Waters,
Aye.
Mr. Gray, Mr. Passios,
I'm noted for voting no, but I will vote yes this evening.
Mr. Simeone.
Aye.
Mr. Menard.
Aye.
And I for myself. We are adjourned at 10:28 PM. Wow. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen,
Night.
for your.